Hello. There we go. So, hello. Going to be a bit of a different stream tonight. I'm going to be reading a book for you guys. This is what we're going to do every Thursday night. The goal is to shoot for 10 p.m. Mountain Time. I just started a new job today, which has a bit of a wonky schedule. So some nights I'll probably be getting in a little bit earlier than others. But some nights I may not be getting home until 9 o'clock at night. So after getting food and showering and everything, some nights it may be a little bit later than 10 before I get started. But hopefully I should be starting at right about 10 every Thursday. But yeah, we're going to do... this book we'll probably get through tonight. It's a novella, so it won't be too long. So we can probably get through it tonight. But I plan to basically do a different story each time. If we don't get through the entire book one Thursday, then it may take 2 or 3 Thursdays to get through it. But yeah, we'll move on from story to story as we go along. And then every Thursday I'll be drinking coffee and giving you guys some trivia about coffee, as well as tips on how to prepare it, talking about the type of coffee that I'm drinking. So for the next little bit, might be a couple of repeats for the next month, but I will try to mix it up as much as possible. If folks would like me to read a particular story, feel free to say so in the chat. You can DM me on Discord by heading over to cadecavediscord.com, or you can DM me on Twitch and let me know a story that you'd like me to read. If there's a type of coffee you would like me to drink and talk about, please feel free to do the DMs as well. Basically, if you want to donate, which you can do via raven.rocks, ravvyn.rocks, feel free to donate and leave a message there saying, hey, this is for this specific type of coffee. I'd love to have you feature it on the show. Basically, buy me a bag of the coffee and I will prepare it and drink it and talk about it. So tonight, drinking something from my past. The very first coffee shop that I ever went to, I was 15 or 16. It was called Jitterbug. And they used a brand called Equal Exchange. Now, it's not the best coffee I've ever had. There are certainly ones that are more high-end. But it is a really solid blend of coffee. It's affordable, and for the money, I think it's very, very good. So mostly drinking it tonight because I recently discovered the coffee was available online and got really excited because I went through high school drinking this stuff. Has a lot of really good memories for me. So the particular one I'm drinking right now is called Organic Mind, Body, and Soul. It is a blend of medium and Vienna roasts. So here's what the package looks like. Let's see if I can center this. As you can see, the roast level is about a medium. So that's what it looks like. You can check out their stuff at equalexchange.coop. So that's equalexchange.coop. But yeah, this is a really good blend. Like I said, it's pretty affordable. It was about $8 on Amazon. And I have Prime, so shipping was free. I got it, I guess about 24 hours after I ordered it. But yeah, it's 2-day free shipping if you have Amazon Prime. So it's a great way to get it. I'm sure you can probably order it off their website, though I think if you go directly to their website, you have to order larger quantities. This one is a 12-ounce bag, whole bean. So, let me show you kind of what it looks like now that we've looked at the package. Let's see if I can get this on the camera without spilling it everywhere. This is what the beans look like. And I'm not quite sure if you can see really well in there. You can see, you know, some of these are lighter, some of these are darker. And that's the mix of the medium and the Vienna roast. Let's see if I can find specifically two that are different. Or at least a couple here. Let's see if that shows up any better on the video there. So they are different colors, and it's because they are different roasts. But you can also see, and this is kind of what I mean by it's, you know, not a high-end coffee. If you look through here, you may notice that some of the beans are broken. There's some of them have little bits on there. See if I can get the camera to focus. There we go. So you can see there's some broken bits of bean here. Not many. There's just a few in here. But that typically means that the coffee is going to be a little bit cheaper, a little bit lesser quality than, say, like a single origin coffee that's, you know, 12, 15 bucks per 12-ounce bag. That's why this one works really well, like I said, as a breakfast coffee. It's, like I said, $8 a pound, or not a pound, per 12-ounce bag, which means it's pretty darn affordable. For a single person drinking coffee, 2 cups of coffee every morning, 12-ounce bag should last you, I'd say probably about, I think they last me about 3 or 4 weeks usually. If you drink a little bit more coffee than that, or if there's a couple people, you know, you may go through a couple bags a month, but that's not bad at all. And so what I've prepared is drip coffee. And it's really good. So what I did was I ground the beans up for that particular brewing method. And you can see, hopefully, again, hopefully I don't end up pouring this out. You can see right there kind of what that looks like. Again, I'll pour some of this in my hand so you can kind of see it hopefully a little bit better. It's about the consistency of kosher salt. Which if you're not familiar with kosher salt, it's about 3 or 4 times the size of a grain of table salt. Let's see if I can put that up there. So that's kind of what the grind looks like. I have a adjustable conical burr grinder. And I have that about halfway between fine and medium on that grinder is the grind that we did for that. And that's a pretty good one for a drip coffee maker, which is what most people have and use. Now, if I was going to brew this in something like a French press, which is one of my favorite ways to make coffee, and working on getting another French press, I would go with something more coarse, probably about twice that size per coffee ground. But on the flip side, if we're going to do some espresso with an espresso machine, it'd be much smaller, about the consistency of granulated sugar, maybe a little bit finer than that. Turn that music down. So yeah, that was the coffee that we're drinking tonight. Like I said, I did brew it in a drip coffee maker. However, one thing that I like to do, because drip coffee makers tend to have a warming plate underneath the pitcher for the coffee, and that's fine for 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes if you're not getting back to the coffee right away. But any more than that, it starts to kind of cook it, and eventually will give it a burned kind of flavor. You'll start to smell it as well. It's not as bad as, like, say, burnt popcorn, but the longer it sits on there, the more it's going to get towards that end of the odor spectrum there. So what I like to do, I have just a double wall insulated, vacuum insulated bottle here. You can use a travel mug as well if you like, or a carafe, or a thermos. But I just after it's completely brewed all the way, I'll usually pour it into one of these. And so pour it into one of these, and it keeps it pretty warm for a few hours. Go ahead and pour myself some more here. And hopefully without making a mess. And that is why I have a saucer with this cup. So, try to lift this up again. Hopefully I don't end up spilling this everywhere. But this is the cup that I'm currently using. This also relates to the story tonight. But that's kind of what it looks like there. So that's the coffee we're drinking tonight. Hey, Rowan. Yes, I am using that cup. I was just talking about the coffee that I've prepared for the story tonight. And it is quite tasty. So the reason I'm using this particular cup is because we are reading Shizukaze tonight. And this cup actually inspired the cup that the main character in that story uses. Though hers is a bit bigger. This is actually more of a teacup, but it is really good for espresso. But I thought for tonight I would use it because it kind of relates to the story. And Rowan says, Handsome Collection is on sale for $6. Awesome! I'll be sure to pick it up. Yeah, getting the pre-sequel would be great. Then we can actually play it together. So yeah, it's very good coffee. Like I said, have had better. It's certainly not the most top-end coffee in the world, but it is a fantastic blend, and for the money, it's amazing. It's got a slightly darker roast than I usually go for. The Vienna roast is very dark, which with coffee, when you do that, the darker the roast, the less you taste of the actual bean itself, and the more you get that sort of caramelized, charred kind of flavor. If you were to compare it to, say, toasting a marshmallow, just for example, the lighter it's toasted, the more it tastes like a marshmallow, like you just pulled it out of the bag. The darker you go, so if you, let's say you set it on fire, then it goes to a very, very dark caramelized flavor, which is very different. That's kind of how it works with coffee. The lighter the roast, the more you taste of the actual bean itself, the plant. You get a lot of the nuances of the flavor. It's why most really expensive coffees will be lighter roasts, because you want to get as much of the flavor of the coffee itself in there. And then darker roasts will be usually a little bit cheaper. Without going into too much boring trivia, if you're familiar with Starbucks, they kind of are known for their really dark roasts. And a big reason for that is that they're so huge of a company, they go through so much coffee, that they kind of have to get rid of some of that natural flavor of the bean in order to make it consistent across all their, plethora of stores. So that's why most coffees at Starbucks tend to be a little bit darker. Even their blonde and medium roast are a little bit darker than a blonde or medium roast that you'd probably see somewhere else. Which is not to say Starbucks coffee is bad. It is, I think it's decent. I actually like their Pike Place roast coffee a little bit. Not usually my go-to, but I've had it before, and it's pretty good. Their blonde roast stuff is really good too. But anyways, that's kind of your bit of coffee trivia for the night. And because this does have medium and dark roast in it in the blend, that's one of the reasons it also lends itself really well to being a breakfast coffee, where typically you want a lighter roast because you want more caffeine, you want more really good coffee flavor to kind of get you going. But it can also be used as a dessert coffee or an evening coffee because it does have that darker roast in there, which has... you tell me you don't get ASMR, and here you are doing it. How am I doing ASMR? The darker, their darker roasts tend to be better with dessert because it's more caramelized, a little more bitter, a little bit stronger. Helps to offset really sweet desserts, especially like cheesecake, things like that. Low, quiet voice. I thought ASMR, I'd be like, and this is what you need to know about coffee. I thought it was more like a radio show. Anyways, that's the coffee I'm drinking tonight. Speaking of which, I'm going to get a little bit more here. Ow. And burn myself in the process. I guess I could do some of that by pouring it right over here by the microphone. I don't think my gain's turned up quite high enough for you to hear that, but maybe it came through. Anyway, so that's the coffee that we're talking about tonight and drinking. And then the story that we're going to be reading, like I said, is Shizukesa, a Ruku Karasu story, which is written by me. I figured if we're going to start doing this every week, might as well start with something I'm really familiar with. And I don't think you can get more familiar with a book than if you write it yourself. So, we're going to jump right in with the prologue here. And I'm going to be reading the second print version, which is not quite on Amazon yet. The first print version is currently up. It's essentially the exact same story. The only thing I did was change some wording here and there with a subsequent edit about a year after it came out, just to refine a couple things that I kind of wish I had done on the first book originally. So the difference between the second print and the first print is pretty negligible. It's mostly just for me is why there's differences. So if you're following along tonight and you go out and you get the book and it reads slightly differently, that'll be why. So to start off with, the prologue is narrated by a surprisingly well-spoken and self-aware pirate. So for this scene, kind of imagine that you're, in some salty dog tavern, that, there's people making a ruckus around you. Maybe some people are fighting. Maybe some quiet accordion music in the background in the corner. Some really sad song. And you're sitting down talking to somebody, asking them about this pirate legend that you've heard about called Ruku. So, across the table, you see this surprisingly well-spoken pirate go, "This is the legend of Ruku Karasu, one of the most feared and respected ship captains to ever operate in the three seas. Some say she was a pirate, others a purveyor of freedom. Stories are conflicting and biased in their motive, but I feel I can honestly say, as part of the Shizukesa crew, she was a maven of wave and sail with a heart as golden as the ducats that consistently filled her ship's hold. To truly understand Ruku, I feel it's probably best to start at the beginning. When she was a small lass, with not even a hint of sea legs about her. Not many know that part of her story, but those of us who were lucky enough to hear the occasional tale here and there, when she'd be drunk enough to talk about her past. The beginning. That's where I should start the story. Back at the root of the legend, the heart of the epic, maybe just a little exciting tale of how she commandeered her ship first. To get your blood pumping and focus the mind, of course. So go ahead, get yourself a nice pint of grog or whatever spirit it is you fancy. Go ahead, I'll wait right here with the bookmark while you get to it. All settled with your spirits, blankets and such. You need any snacks? Anything like that? Okay. Very good. Well, let's begin with Ruku. You see, when she first decided on a life at sea, she knew she was going to need proper training and such. Now, in those times, a young lass like her could ne'er afford schooling or the like. There's not many would give her a proper job either. Cap, though, she was cunning as a fox, more skill with her tongue than most master swordsmen have with a blade. That's skilled tongue in the sense of sharp wit, you see. What I mean to say is, Ruku had a way with words and a penchant for numbers, a natural talent, you could say, that made her the perfect fit for a merchant vessel's purser. She went to several ships' captains in the harbor of Festoon, but nearly everyone told her to try her luck applying at the brothel or tailor shops in the city. Save for one, of course. There was one captain there, don't rightly remember what she said his name was. She mostly just called the man the Big Dummy. Anyhow, the Big Dummy gave her a shot at 1/5 the wage of anyone else on the ship. Not having many other amenable options, Ruku took the job and spent the next year pestering, bribing, blackmailing, and even seducing any crew member she could until they taught her how to be the best sailor she could be. When they would make stops, she used her talents and the guidance of the Big Dummy to make trades, eventually making her an incredibly shrewd and cunning trader. Now, over the course of that year, the captain still only paid Ruku about 1/5 of what anyone else on the ship made, so Ruku, being clever, started making side trades. Perhaps when the captain was, off by himself in the market, started to amass a small fortune this way. Not near enough to buy her own ship, but more than most of the other crew had tucked away. But Ruku had plans for that money. She wanted the ship, the Gilded Trader, and was going to use her savings to help her get it. So she started plotting and also scheming to make it hers. So now that we have the setting, let us commence with the, what was the word that Captain taught us? Oh yes, plot. So Chapter 1, Ruku's Revenge. Ruku smirked to herself as she tucked a rebellious lock of red hair behind her ear and stepped onto the gangway off the Gilded Trader, onto the decks onto the docks of Consignia. She quickly took in her surroundings and got a feel for where she had to go. Consignia was a massive trade hub, attracting people from every corner of the world. As a result, the city was a little difficult to navigate, especially so in the middle of the night. She quickly made her way to a dark alleyway, tucking her cloak around her buxom hips and petite chest, to avoid drawing any attention to her form. It did not take her long, though, to locate the less than subtle sign for the Onyx Exchange, which featured a black-cloaked figure sneakily pulling a bag of coins from his pocket. She spoke quietly to herself. Gotta hand it to you, Mingo. What you lack in subtlety, you make up for in style. She quietly opened the door and stepped into the windowless building with a soft step. She was quickly met with a long blade placed gently to her throat, followed by a very gruff, very Cajun accented man speaking to her in a grunt. You best be giving me the passphrase, sweetheart, before I go and cut that bogorjum. And I apologize, I am terrible at doing a Cajun accent, so probably sounds more British, but just take my word for it. And a fine evening to you too, Fanty. I believe the phrase you're looking for is local man's severed genitalia found hanging from the flagpole, threatened Ruku. At least I tried, thank you. From the other side of the dimly lit room, a laugh rang out like the hum of a wet finger across the rim of a crystal glass. Now, can't we all just get along, Fanty? You know that's Ruku. We've been expecting her. Ruku, while your failed threats do arouse me, so we are here for business, so let's play nice, eh? Declared Mingo in a flirtatious tone. Fanty made a disgruntled chuffing noise, but withdrew his blade and sat down in a chair by the door. With the blade removed, Ruku let out a laugh of her own and winked at Mingo. Does that arousal mean a discount, or am I losing my touch? Mingo laughed again and crossed the room, standing close to Ruku with a devilish smile. Oh, you can touch plenty after our business is concluded, hmm? Ruku just rolled her eyes with a smile and handed Mingo a small bag of coins. Mingo frowned as he picked up the bag and jingled it. This seems rather light, no? He said with a suspicious tone. Perhaps you're trying to cheat me, eh? Ruku shot the smarmy man a sharp look and retorted, That's gold coins, not silver. Excuse me. You know me well enough by now to know I don't cheat those who don't cheat me. She paused and then smirked evilly. Or perhaps the problem is you have cheated me, and now you're worried I figured it out. Well, that was ominous. Okay. Right? Hopefully that cools things down. Yeah. Mingo laughed nervously and shook his head, quickly depositing the small coin purse into the pocket of his cloak. Of course not. I'm a proud business owner. Perfectly legitimate business enterprises. I have roots in the community. Why, the very idea that you would think such a thing wounds me. Ruku arched an eyebrow, but just shook her head and pushed past Mingo towards the storeroom. She knew it was in the back of the building from her previous trips here. Where's the wine, Mingo? We need to get it moved to the Gilded Trader before dawn. You come too, Fanty. I'm going to need someone to haul this thing. Ruku said in a very authoritative tone, not giving the men time to try any advances or scams. Yes, right this way. Mingo followed Ruku through the door to the storehouse, and Fanty was fast in tow. Within the hour, the three, with the help of Mingo's horse and cart, managed to get the cask of special wine that Ruku had ordered into the hold of the Gilded Trader. With the wine taken care of, Ruku finally retired to her quarters with just enough time to catch a couple of hours of sleep. When the sun rose and Ruku awoke, she quickly headed back into port, grabbing a hard roll from the galley on her way out. She considered buying a nice hot breakfast in the market, but her wine purchase had taken up most of her savings, and she was going to need the last of her gold at the herbalist. Besides, she thought to herself, there would be more hot meals aplenty once she had accomplished her task. Ruku made her way first to the manufacturing portion of the market to meet up with the buyer she and her captain had lined up for the bounty of Eric and Silk in the trader's hold. I'm also going to turn this music down real quick because it's a little loud. That's better. Alright. So let's see. Lined up the bounty of Eric and Silk in the trader's hold. She couldn't let the captain or his crew know she was up to anything after all. She quickly met with the textile merchant and arranged for the transfer of the cargo for the plethora of gold chests the merchant would be paying with. Satisfied that the transfer was underway without any issues, Ruku quietly slipped away and headed to the agricultural section of the marketplace to locate the herbalist. On her way there, however, just as she had cut through an alleyway she thought was a shortcut, she was approached by two of the dirtiest, dustiest men she had ever seen in her life. They blocked her path ahead and behind her, their stance clear that they were not really looking for polite small talk. "Well, aren't you two just the dustiest men I've ever seen?" called out Ruku. "What did you two do, challenge a sand dune to a duel and lose?" The two men growled in surprise. They were used to women cowering and whimpering, or at worst crying out for help. "Hey, Georgie May, how are you?" Or at the worst crying out for help. Ruku, however, just stood there with an irritating smirk on her face, her stance defiant and her hand already resting on her rapier. "I'm doing pretty good." "Oi, what you think, Rupert?" said Dusty. Should we teach this Aster place? And a lot of these words are in Welsh, which I'm not going to try to pronounce. Just know that they are unkind things. This insult here needs to understand to respect her betters. At this, Ruku just laughed, a trilling and taunting sound. "Ah, ha, 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 ha. I will gladly respect my betters, should I ever meet one. I'm fairly certain that the antlion that violated your virtue out in the dunes is more class than you rapscallions, however. So kindly remove yourselves, or prepare to lose more than just your virtue." At this, Ruku winked and drew her rapier. "Hey, Alwyn, I think she just insulted me mum. Let's slit her throat," retorted not-so-dusty man, now known as Rupert. "You've done it now," exclaimed Dusty, now known as Alwyn. Their opening statements having been made, the three began to fight. Alwyn, seeming to be the alpha of the two, decided to employ the causation of his previously mentioned appearance and kicked a substantial amount of dirt at Ruku's face. Expecting such a dirty trick, Ruku used her left hand to pull her tricorn hat down over her face, blocking the dirt as she lifted her leg and thrust her torso forward, managing to mule kick the silt-ridden Rupert squarely in his gut. Having had the wind soundly knocked out of him, the now ruddy-faced Rupert merely fell to his knees holding his bruised belly. Alwyn, to his credit, did not behave cowardly, rather to his everlasting regret, charged forward, expecting to catch Ruku blinded or, at worst, off balance. Ruku merely flipped her hat back onto her head with a flourish, giving the appalled Alwyn a sly wink as she fell to the side, rolling in a semicircle around the poor pilferer, while swinging her rapier back, creating an irreparable incision on the man's Achilles tendon. "Ah, she's done cut off me foot! She's a devil, she is! Rupert, help me!" cried out a dauntingly damaged Alwyn. Rupert, having regained some semblance of an ability to breathe, quickly scooped himself up and half-supported, half-dragged Alwyn away. Dirty trick. Yes, very dirty trick. Oh, that takes care of that. Now the herbalist should be just around... Ruku spoke to herself as she turned the corner to see the string of booths and tables lining the street with various vegetables, fruits, and herbs. She quickly made her way to the particular shop she was after. Apthea's Apothecary, Almanacs, and a Literary Admonitions. That's a mouthful. Ruku chuckled to herself as she read the shop name and made her way past the booths outside the shop, through the rickety wooden door, and into the shop itself. As Ruku entered the shop, she was taken aback, albeit briefly, by the strong, earthy scent of all of the various leaves, plants, roots, and powders scattered throughout the shop. Excuse me. After blinking a few times to rid her eyes of excessive moisture caused by the pungent smells, Ruku spotted Apthea and crossed the room to the counter Apthea was standing behind. "Hello there, ma'am. Might you be Miss Apthea..." Oh, I'm sorry, it's Ruku. Rewind that a bit. "Hello there, ma'am. Might you be Miss Apthea of the acclaimed Apthea's Apothecary, Almanacs, and a Literary Admonitions? The all-knowing of things agricultural and appropriately agrarian?" Apthea laughed loudly, a surprisingly deep laugh from a female form so fragile and small. Apthea nodded with a smile, speaking in a thick island accent. Now's the accent. Funnier because it's your heckin' book and you still mess up who's saying what. Yes, I know. I haven't actually read this in probably a year. So speaking in a thick island accent, "Aye, that I am, little lady. And I see you sensed my solicitation of sounds superbly similar at the start of spoken words, eh? I like you. I'll give you a goodly generous gift of a grand discount." Ruku couldn't help herself. She giggled and she covered her mouth at the small woman before her, as the small woman before her let loose with rapid alliteration. "Thank you so much, Miss Apthea. I'm hoping you can help me locate something. I'm looking for a powerful sedative, something strong enough to knock out, say, a 300-pound gorilla of a man when mixed with alcohol and ingested. Might you have anything like that?" Ruku inquired. Let me think," replied Apthea while tapping her fingernails on her teeth. "Well, I could use sleeping powder, but that might be too diluted in alcohol. I think I know just the thing." Apthea rushed about the store gathering various jars and bags of ingredients, piling them on the counter. Once satisfied that she had everything she wanted, she began to pour various powders and herbs into a large mortar and pestle, furiously grinding away and mixing. "This should do the trick, right here. I'm combining a few different sleep aids and sedatives. It won't be enough to kill no one now. Just put them into a deep sleep for a few hours." "How much did you say you needed?" Apthea asked. Ruku chuckled to herself and grinned. "Enough to knock out a full ship's crew at once?" she asked a bit sheepishly, not sure if the woman would agree to help her if she knew about the drug's nefarious purpose. To Ruku's delight, however, Apthea didn't flinch at all. She just nodded and added more of each ingredient to the mix. Once Apthea was satisfied with her work, she put it all into a glass jar and handed it over to Ruku, quoting her a modest price. Ruku grinned wide and happily paid the price, noting with surprise that it left her just enough coin for something fresh to eat on the way back to the ship. Ruku tucked the jar into her belt as she left Apthea's store and headed back towards the ship. She stopped by a food stand along the way and picked up a skewer of cubed meat, dropping the last of her coin into the vendor's hand. Ruku then moved quickly through the market back towards the ship, taking a bite of her food here and there as she walked. Thankfully, the return trip proved to be less eventful, and she made it back before incurring too much suspicion regarding her extended absence. The food aided in her alibi as well. Once she was sure she could sneak into the cargo hold of the ship without anyone noticing, Ruku made her way down the stairs, past chest after chest loaded with gold coins that the big dummy captain had made from that silk shipment, and finally into the area of the hold that housed the ship's food stores. She quickly found the wine cask she had loaded onto the ship last night, and carefully opened the top of it. She pulled the jar of knockout drug from her belt and nearly dropped it when she heard a clatter from another part of the hold behind her. Saying a quiet prayer, she quickly dumped the jar's contents in the cask, tucked the jar back into her belt, and replaced the cask's lid slowly. As she did so, she stepped out back into the walkway of the hold and muttered to herself, "Just look casual. You have every right to be down here. You didn't do anything bad. You're perfectly innocent. Just don't look guilty." "Oh, hi!" she exclaimed as she almost toppled into one of the deckhands as she walked around one of the crates in the hold. "Oi, watch where you going, you idiot!" exclaimed the deckhand. "What was you muttering about a minute ago, not looking guilty and whatnot? Was you stealing? Why, I ought to throw you off the ship right now." Ruku chuckled nervously. "Me? Steal? Oh, never. I wouldn't dream of it. I was just, very much so not scooping my hands through the gold coins and imagining I was a rich queen, and this was all mine. Nope, not fantasizing about that, because, that'd be really childish and kind of creepy. So, that's what I was busy not doing, and, talking to myself about not doing." Ruku made a bluff, desperately hoping her nervousness about the lie would work to her favor to sell her feigned embarrassment. "Uh-huh. Well, keep your head in your reality, you twit. The captain might not be as kind as me if he thought you was playing with his gold. Now be a good little girl and go swab the deck. Gunther spilled a couple of tankards of grog up there, and we don't want a sticky deck now, do we?" The deckhand grunted and pushed past Ruku to go about his business. Ruku sighed in relief and quickly went back up to the deck. Normally she would have shot off her mouth at the man for his chauvinism, but she was just happy she hadn't been caught. Once on the deck of the ship, Ruku quickly went about her work, filling a bucket with seawater and grabbing a mop. She had a hard time not laughing to herself as she knew her hour was almost at hand. Soon the ship would be hers, and that stingy simpleton of a captain would be out on his butt. If anyone had actually been paying attention to her, they might have noticed her suppressed laughter was making her have a very evil-looking smirk, almost murderous in appearance. The rest of the day was relatively uneventful. Once Ruku had scrubbed down the deck, she helped the rest of the crew rig the sails and set sail for their home port. Everyone expected this return trip to be uneventful. There were no pirates that operated in the area. The weather was typically mild, and the wind looked to be blowing their way. With the crew feeling calm and unguarded, and the captain, no doubt, feeling quite smug and rich, the most recent transaction, of which Ruku did most of the negotiating. Now was the perfect time for Ruku to enact her plan. Once the sun had started to sink down towards the sea, offering sensational colors of cinnamon, purple, and orange, Ruku tapped the captain on the shoulder. "Sir, I wanted to tell you earlier, but I didn't get the chance. I managed to talk our buyer into a bonus for the crew, something a little special for a job well done." She smiled with half-authentic, half-feigned pride. "A bonus for the crew? You should have talked to me first, you little cur. I would have negotiated a better payout, better bottom line, not something for the crew." The captain grumbled and growled, spittle spraying from his mouth as he barked at Ruku. "Yeah, well, remember, sir, a happy crew makes for smooth sailing and a happy captain," Ruku retorted with a sigh that denoted her utter lack of patience with the man. "Anyways, our buyer was bragging about a shipment of special wine he managed to buy off some poor sap merchant for half its value. So I talked him into letting it go of one of the kegs. Should be just enough for the crew to have a fun time tonight and blow off some steam," she said with a very convincing air of arrogance. The captain chuffed and shook his head as he walked up the stairs to the ship's wheel, made a course adjustment. "Gods no, you sorry excuse for a purser. I can sell that when we reach port of the harbor." Ruku followed the captain and rolled her eyes as she heard his refusal. For this plan to go through, things were going to need a little nudge. She grinned wickedly at the captain and then jumped onto the guardrail around the ship's wheel, grabbing a hanging rope so she could lean far out towards the front of the ship, shouting out, "You hear that, boys? Captain says he picked up a big keg of tasty wine for us for doing such a good job on this run. Let's break it out. Drinks are on our ever magnanimous captain." Ryuku's declaration was met with a roar of approval from the crew. They immediately broke out into a crude sailing song about drinking and sex, and the master of the hold quickly grabbed 2 other men and went into the hold to retrieve the wine. Ryuku gave the captain an arrogant smirk and winked at him. "You're welcome, sir." She giggled to herself and jumped down onto the main deck below, running off to help distribute the wine before the captain could protest or punish her for that trick. Ryuku made sure that every single person on the ship got a generous portion of that wine, especially the captain. They all began to drink, and drink some more, and by nightfall everyone except for Ryuku had fallen into a deep, drugged sleep. Ryuku smiled up at the full moon and let out a satisfied sigh, taking in the moment of her victory for a moment. After a minute or two, Ryuku looked around at all the passed-out men on the ship, knowing she had a lot of work to do, and only a few hours before they started to wake up. She started by steering the ship out of the wind, making sure the ship would stay relatively still, while still being able to quickly move once her work was done. She worked swiftly, using ropes and sheets of canvas where needed to gather all of the sleeping bodies into one place on the ship. Excuse me. It was hard work, especially since some of the men were twice her size, but she managed to get them all together after only a couple of hours. Once that was done, she went down to the hold and grabbed the few chests of gold that she could carry on her own, and began to rig together a floating, gilded prison for the abusive captain and his crew. Ryuku took the longboats on the ship and rigged them together with a system of ropes and pulleys, forming them into a sort of network of boats with ropes and chests of gold between each boat. The ropes were taut and the chests of gold hung from the middle of them, between the different longboats. It was all balanced in such a way that removing any one of the chests would tip the other boats and cause the entire network of floating wood and rope to collapse on itself. Nearly exhausted now, Ryuku looked over her work wearily, but with a distinct sense of pride at her accomplishment. She knew she couldn't rest now, however, as she only had a couple of hours before the men would begin to wake up, and if they were still on the ship when they did, she would be as good as dead, or worse. So Ryuku began rolling men onto the ship's planks and into the waiting network of longboats below. Even to her surprise, she managed to get each boat full without collapsing any part of her web of ropes and boats. When finally every last man was off the ship, Ryuku was ready to sail away. She cut the ropes holding the longboats in place, and watched in drowsy silence as the collection of boats began to drift away. Dripping with sweat, Ryuku staggered her fatigued frame to the ship's wheel and steered the vessel back into the wind towards her destination. She glanced over her shoulder and gave a weak, wicked grin back at the unconscious crew in their floating prison, before she slumped over the ship's wheel and passed out herself, having accomplished the commandeering of the ship single-handedly without a single blade drawn. The ship was hers now, and it would henceforth be called the Shizukesa. Ryuku woke several hours later to a loud boom, followed by a crash of water and a salty, wet spray hitting her in the face. Chapter 2. Why can't things ever go smooth? Ryuku shook her head to clear the wet locks of red hair from her face. She looked around, still rather groggy from the rude awakening, but even in her bleary-eyed state, it was clear to see the Galavat-class ship approaching fast off the port bow of the Shizukesa. Excuse me. The ship had a trio of long guns mounted on the front of the ship, arranged in a sort of cone pattern, so that it could effectively fire directly forward, as well as 45 degrees to the left or the right. The sails were all rigged for full speed, and the vessel was quickly catching up to the Shizukesa. Ryuku cursed under her breath and took in the horizon to see anything she could use to her advantage. What she saw was a landmass to the port side of the ship. Apparently that was where the Galavat ship, from where the Galavat ship had launched. Lutz isn't currently working, by the way. Oh, darn. I'll have to, let me go ahead and, thanks for letting me know. Let me take that message off. And I'll have to see what's going on with that. Where were we? Ryuku cursed under her breath and took in the horizon to see anything she could use to her advantage. What she saw was a landmass to the port side of the ship. Apparently that was from where the Galavat ship had launched. It said something went seriously wrong and we're on it. Okay, hopefully they fix it. She didn't recognize it, however, and that is when she realized she was moving far more slowly than she should be. The sound of another boom and a sudden sharp crack and creaking of breaking wood shook the last of the cobwebs from her mind, and she realized she must have drifted off course in her sleep into Severn Dragoon pirate territory. She cursed again, seeing how much danger she was in now. The Severn Dragoon pirates, while not known for their brilliant tactics and strategy, were known for their savagery, brutality, and ability to overwhelm their prey in sheer numbers. Their territory was fairly large, littering the islands and patches off the coast around the Sandusian Sea. They had a reputation as not only pirates, but ship thieves, which made their fleet quite large and diverse. It was rumored that they had nearly every class of ship in their fleet, and they targeted everything from fishing boats to some of the military corvettes and clippers out there. Ruku knew if there was one small ship here now, then there would be at least half a dozen dropping down on her within half an hour. She saw she was not in line with the wind, and the Shizukesa was only traveling at a fraction of her normal speed. That explains why that piece of Dorma is keeping pace with me, Ruku cursed aloud. Ruku knew that the Shizukesa, being a 5th Mark frigate, was one of the fastest ships on the ocean. Elsie is the Robin Hood of ship thieves, then? Kind of. Where were we? Being a 5th Mark frigate was one of the fastest ships on the ocean. Outrunning a Galavat class would be a small feat if she could get the sails full. Just as Ruku began to turn the ship away from the island and back into the wind, however, she heard another boom and a sharp cracking noise as a cannonball impacted the stern of the ship. As she continued to try to turn the ship's wheel, she was met with a horrible screeching and scratching noise. She quickly ran aft, nearly tumbling over the stern railing in her hurry to look at the damage. She swore again, loudly this time, as she saw a piece of the hull of the ship jutting out into the mechanical workings of the rudder. She wouldn't be able to steer more than 5 degrees until she... Wow, I'm getting tongue-tied, I'm sorry. She wouldn't be able to steer more than 5 degrees until that was pulled out of the works, and that would take the ship sitting still, a harness and rope, and some time. With a full crew, she might be able to attempt that repair while in battle, but on her own it was impossible. Ruku began to panic, mind racing as she struggled to come up with a defense or escape plan. She knew if the pirates boarded, she would eventually lose the ship. She could fight several of them, but eventually their numbers would overwhelm her. She knew outrunning them wasn't going to be an option for quite a while, as her ship could barely turn. She needed something else to fight them with, something she could exploit, a weakness of some kind. She glanced over at the ship and could see the captain of the vessel on the bow of the ship with a spyglass, no doubt trying to see how many people they would need to fight to take the ship. After another long gun shot splashed off the Shizukesa's bow, an idea finally came to Ruku. She realized that while the captain would be after the ship, most likely to take as his own in the Severn Dragoon fleet, the crew would be more interested in gold, and that was something she still had plenty of in the ship's hold. She still had a few minutes before the pirates were close enough to throw grappling hooks and try to board, so Ruku ran down to the hold, groaning as her muscles reminded her of how sore they were from the work she had done the previous day. She grabbed a canvas sack and loaded up as many gold coins as she could carry into it before heading up to the deck again. The Shizukesa was still a merchant vessel, so she was not equipped to fight long battles, but she did have a few cannons for just such occasions as this. Ruku ran to the aftmost cannons on the gun deck and checked the charge and fuse. It was already prepped to fire, just missing the cannonball. Ruku sighed in relief that something, no matter how small, had gone smoothly in this escape. She forwent the cannonball, and instead loaded the barrel up with gold coins. As soon as she had done so, she lined up her shot, waiting until the starboard side of the Galavat ship was in full view, before she lit the fuse and covered her ears as the cannon fired. The shot went off like a blunderbuss, launching gold coins at roughly 800 feet per second, like a firing line of muskets at the deck of the pirate ship. A dozen men went down in a flash, bodies peppered with gold coin-sized entry wounds. The rest of the crew scrambled in fear for their lives, and shortly after, in a greedy frenzy. The Galavat glistened and twinkled in the bright sunlight as the hull, deck, and masts were dotted with shiny gold coins lodged into the wood. Ruku looked back over the rails of the Shizukesa to inspect the results and couldn't help but laugh as she saw the other ship's captain yelling and fuming at his crew as they ran around the ship trying to pull out gold coins from the wood and pocket them. The Galavat ship was now in a grappling range, but the crew was too busy scrambling for gold to notice. Ruku ran back to the ship's wheel and looked around. She was beginning to pick up speed as the Shizukesa was very slowly turning back to the right course. Ruku grabbed the spyglass stored by the ship's wheel and took a quick look around. She swore under her breath as she saw two more Galavat-class ships approaching from the forward port side of her ship. It looked like she would be able to move at full speed before they reached her, but it would be close. As the two other Galavat ships closed in, the Shizukesa had picked up considerable speed. The gold coin-peppered ship was trailing behind with a very angry captain still yelling at his crew. Ruku sighed in relief as the closest ship finally began to trail behind. There were a few more splashes as the pirates tried futilely to hit the Shizukesa as she escaped, but eventually they gave up and sailed back to their island stronghold. Ruku took a breath and collected herself. She had managed to escape the Severn Dragoon pirates through sheer luck and ingenuity, but she knew she wouldn't be able to rely on luck in the future. Her next order of business after making repairs would be to find herself an able crew and modify her ship so that it was not only fast, but able to go toe-to-toe with pirate attacks when she needed to. Ruku knew she had been on course for Kawain, an island where she could obtain those goals, before her run-in with the Severn Dragoon, but she still was a bit confused about where she was at the moment, which was quite unsettling. After an hour or so, she was able to gauge her heading by watching the direction the sun was moving in the sky. Once she had her heading, she went to the captain's cabin to check the ship's charts, to see if she could figure out where she was based on what she knew of her heading last night and what little she saw of that Severn Dragoon island. When she reached the cabin, she sighed in disgust, having forgotten for a moment how much the cabin had been decorated to be a self-congratulatory display for the previous captain. I'm going to have to do some major redecorating in here before I start living out of this cabin, she said to the stuffed animal head hanging on the wall. You mean kawaii? Very funny. She said to the stuffed animal head hanging on the wall. After sifting through several stacks of superfluous papers and certifications about the previous captain's skills, Ruku finally found a stack of charts and gathered them up. She looked around the room and saw the large table she needed was covered in trinkets, trophies, and otherwise worthless to her items. She shrugged to herself and, with one arm, swept it all off the desk into a bucket. That's better, she said to herself, and she laid the charts out on the table. Once all the charts were laid out, Ruku began to sift through them, trying to get them into some sense of organization. After roughly an hour, Ruku finally got the charts in order and was able to flip through them easily enough to find where she was. I really wish I'd paid a little more attention to Porcho when he was rambling on about sextants and headings. Ruku sighed in self-reproach. Never thought I'd say that. Porcho was almost as much of a blowhard as the captain. Ruku chuckled at that, as that made her think of what she had done to her old crew. I wonder if they've picked up yet, or if they've been picked up yet, or if they all drowned trying to get to that gold, Ruku said again to the stuffed animal head on the wall. Ruku let out another sigh and went back to the charts, doing some calculations in her head. Navigation not being her strong suit, she was not overly confident in her course, but she was pretty sure she was on the right heading for now. Hopefully she wouldn't run into too many more problems on her way to Kawain Island. Chapter 3. Meanwhile, back at the lifeboats. The now shipless captain of the Gilded Trader groaned as he started to come around from the drugged wine. The sound of grumbling, moaning, and yawns could be heard all around as the rest of the crew also slowly came to, shaking and rubbing their heads to clear the foggy feeling and to try and soothe the headache they were all experiencing. As the captain looked around and quickly realized what had happened, he let out a string of curses so harsh, so vile, that the rest of the crew held their ears and even all the fish around the lifeboat scattered away in fear. To say the captain was mad or angry would be a rather severe understatement. The man who thought himself infallible, undefeatable, untouchable. He'd been bested by a girl he saw as beneath him, someone worthy of his contempt and a small pile of coins for the menial labor she did. The situation he found himself in was unthinkable, impossible. How could that simple-minded little wharf rat pull something like this off? The captain began to curse under his breath, his mind racing. This couldn't be his fault, could it? No. He was too smart for this, too educated. His intellect was above reproach, he thought to himself. In order for Ruku to pull this off, she must have had help from the crew. That was it. The captain came to the conclusion that his crew had mutinied. That's the only explanation that made sense. The fact that his entire crew, other than Ruku, was stuck on the makeshift raft with him was irrelevant to the captain. He looked around, giving his crew a murderous glare as he tried to decide what must be who must be the ringleader. The captain was too smart to let emotions guide him, or so he thought. He viewed his rage as simply motivation to destroy his enemies, not pausing to even consider that it might influence him. The captain took boastful pride in his lack of emotions, often repeating claims that no one could fluster him because he lacked the emotions to be manipulated by them. That's why he felt no remorse or regret in destroying the people around him now. He would cut them from his life and find a new crew. People were so easy to exploit, after all. It'd be nothing for someone as silver-tongued as himself to find another crew. The captain began to look around, taking in details of how the lifeboats had been strung together, and the gold temptingly floating in the otherwise empty boat. He sat with his legs crossed underneath him, staring at each boat, methodically inspecting every rope and line. The rest of the crew began to complain and yell and curse, more people coming to grips with the severity of what had happened. None of them suspected what was on the captain's mind, though. They knew he was a harsh and calculating man, but he never seemed overtly violent, and in fact, other than his arrogance, most considered him a friendly sort of man. The captain kept his true face hidden from them, however. Few had ever seen his true self, and fewer still had walked away a whole person. The captain ignored the grumblings of the crew and continued his surveying of the raft they were on for several hours. During that time, he also let his hatred for his crew grow and fester, the mental, petulant fumes rising in his mind, choking any protest from his diseased conscience. Drowning was too quick a punishment for these people, the captain thought, but there was no time to destroy these people's lives the proper way. While the crew was still bickering and yelling at one another over their predicament, the captain calmly walked to several ropes and sliced each one with a swing from his cutlass. Within seconds, the raft of lifeboats began to pull apart and shift. Thanks to his study of the way the raft was strung together, the captain knew exactly which boat would not capsize, and swiftly made his way to it, shoving a couple of his crew into the water on the way. Without a word, he began to row away, putting enough distance between himself and the crew putting enough distance between himself and the crew that once they realized what had happened, they could not pull him down as well. As the raft slowly came apart boat by boat, the crew began to panic until finally the tension balancing the gold chest was disrupted and the ring of lifeboats was suddenly jerked inwards, crashing and splintering as they impacted each other and were pulled down into the depths by the gold chests. Several crewmen were dragged down with it, tangled up in the ropes. The crew that remained began floundering in the water, struggling to grab any scrap of wood they could to stay afloat. As the surviving crew members struggled, all they could hear on the ocean breeze was splashing and the sound of the captain laughing as he rowed his boat away. Chapter 4. Quain Island. Fortunately for Ruku, the rest of her trip to Quain Island passed without much incident, though she had to adjust her heading more times than she would have liked to admit. As the Shizukesa approached the port of Isley on Quain Island, Ruku looked over the nest of charts and maps and bunched up pieces of paper with furiously scribbled notes that littered the desk. I'm getting really tongue-tied. With furiously scribbled notes that littered the deck next to the ship's wheel. She was grateful there was no other crew around to see how many times she had miscalculated in her navigation. With a hurried scramble, Ruku gathered all the paper up swiftly, stuffed them into a drawer in her cabin. She was here to find crew after all, and it would not do to have any of them questioning her abilities. She ran up to the ship's wheel just in time to make a couple of quick adjustments to steer the ship up to one of the docks jutting out like spikes from Isley, which was on one of the points of the island. As Ruku looked out over the port, she couldn't help but gasp softly at the sight. She had heard numerous tales and boasts about the city, but none of them could come close to what she saw. Isley City was legendary for being a veritable hive of flotsam and knavery, and what she saw certainly lived up to that reputation. The city was laid out over the shoreline and cliffs of the south side of Quain Island, with rickety-looking platforms and bridges crisscrossing the sides of the cliff, spanning from one side to the other in a network of unadulterated chaos. The entire city seemed to be a dark stain on the otherwise bright and lush island, a stain that seemed to spread out inland like dark tendrils stretching out to grasp at the heart of the island. As Ruku pulled into the port and quickly worked to secure the ship, she couldn't help but scrunch her nose at the strong, odorous breeze that started blowing out from the center of the city. An old sea dog approached her with a chuckle. You get used to the smell after a while, you can," the man explained. Ruku gave a soft chuckle and shrugged. "If you say so, old-timer. I'm hoping I don't need to stay too long. I'm looking for the best of the best for my ship here. It seems she's in need of a new crew." The man arched a brow and looked Ruku up and down skeptically. "Aye, and why would that be? A young lass the likes of you don't seem the captainy sort, and you're too scrappy to be much of a fighter. What happened to your ship's crew?" Ruku just gave the man a wicked grin fit to freeze one's blood, and explained calmly, "Well, there was a mutiny on board my ship, if you can believe that. Seems the previous crew didn't appreciate my abilities, and so I had to put them off the ship. I defeated them single-handedly and set sail for Isley here to replace the ungrateful lot." The old man stared back at her incredulously. Her story, while true from a certain point of view, had the man unsure if he believed it or not. However, there Ruku stood by herself with a very fine ship clearly in her possession. Something about her intimidating grin and the way she rested her hand on the rapier on her hip made the man decide it was better to err on the side of caution and give Ruku the benefit of the doubt. "Well, if you're looking for a crew, you might want to check the pub over there, at the end of the pier. Always some fair sailors there looking for work," the man offered. Ruku gave the man a wink and nod as she tipped the brim of her hat before flipping him a gold coin. "Thanks for the tip, old-timer. There's another 5 coin in it if you make sure nobody messes with my ship while I'm gone," Ruku announced to the man. The old man gave Ruku a half-toothed grin and quickly nodded to a couple other men loitering around about the docks. "You heard the lass. Look alive. Keep an eye on the ship," exclaimed the man. Ruku stepped off the Shizukesa and bundled her red coat around her a little closer to better hide her figure. She was more than capable of handling herself, but Isley was not exactly known as a particularly safe place for women by herself, or for a woman by herself, and she was in a hurry. Ruku had no sooner stepped off the pier, however, when a giant of a man approached her, his grin announcing ahead of him his intentions were not to ask for directions to the nearest chapel. Ruku spotted the man just in time to sidestep and avoid his reach as the man groped about for Ruku's arm. "Oi now, cute little thing like you shouldn't be walking about alone like that. Somebody might take advantage, if you know what I mean," admonished the lewd man. Ruku rolled her eyes at the vile man and decided this was not worth the breath it would take to reply. Men like this would only respond to force, and so Ruku decided to make the most of the situation and get started with her reputation in the city. Without a word, Ruku threw open her coat and drew her rapier in one fluid motion. She sidestepped the man's groping stumbles towards her, letting his awkward momentum carry him further forward, enough distance for her to get behind the man. With a quick flourish of her rapier, she swiped the blade across the back of the man's right knee, causing him to stumble forward with a howl. The man rolled to the ground, holding his leg, the tendons allowing his leg to function having been severed. Ruku spit on the man in disgust and hopped up on a nearby crate just as a crowd of other thugs and ruffians had begun to congregate around the howling man. "Listen up, you curs. I'm Captain Ruku of the Shizukesa. I have defeated entire pirate crews single-handedly, outsmarted the most cunning of ship's captains, and defeated more would-be thieves and rapists than I can count, who are unfortunate enough to choose me as a mark. Cross me and you'll end up worse off than this poor cretin here. Sail with me, follow my orders, and strive to be the best damn sailor you can, and I'll see you get the rewards you deserve." With that proclamation, Ruku tossed a handful of coins out into the gathering crowd. Ruku had intended this to be a show of the rewards she spoke of, and had this been any other city, that might have worked. While the men here were indeed frightened by her, their lust for gold generally overruled their self-preservation instincts. With a loud shout, one of the men in the crowd shouted, "She's loaded with gold! Get her!" After a moment of men looking back and forth at one another, nobody wanting to be the first man in, finally someone yelled and barreled towards Ruku. Ruku drew her rapier again, but by the time she had, the charging man had tripped and crashed into the crate she was standing on, throwing her off balance. She let out a less than frightening, high-pitched yelp as she fell off the crate onto her butt. The men that had gathered around began to laugh, their fear subsiding now that they saw the small woman knocked onto her rear. As they creeped closer, however, a fire lit in Ruku's eyes, and she knew she had to work quickly if she wanted to survive this. She had come too far and planned too much to be overtaken by a bunch of common thugs like this. With an angry scream, Ruku kipped up onto her feet and spun around, letting her coat flow out with the motion, the color and movement just distracting enough for her to lunge forward and hamstring the closest of the dozen or so men with her sword. The man let out a cry and crumpled to the ground, causing the two to either side of him to take a step back in surprise. The men behind Ruku, however, managed to get close enough to grab her by the coat. With a high-pitched cry, she was yanked back towards the back of the crowd. She was able to keep her footing this time, however, and reacted by flicking her rapier up in the air, the rising sword catching the eyes of both the men pulling her back, as well as those in front of her. In the second it took for those men to look up at the now falling sword, Ruku slipped out of her coat, the sudden lack of weight causing the men pulling on the coat to stumble backwards, and Ruku retrieved her rapier from the air as it fell. While a couple of the men in the crowd began to exercise more caution after that display, most of them simply became more angry and rushed her at once. Ruku was able to avoid one man in front of her that had reached for the front of her shirt by arching backwards, looking very much like someone playing limbo. The man immediately behind her decided to take advantage of her awkward position, however, groping down to grip the front of her shirt as well. With a curse under her breath, Ruku dropped back and braced for the wind-knocking impact of landing flat on her back. It hurt landing that way, but by not being where the man expected her to be, it caused both men that had reached for her to stumble forward into each other, their heads impacting with a loud thunk. The two men yowled and held their heads as they fell down to the left and right side of Ruku, soundly out of the fight. There were roughly 10 men left now, though they had all taken a couple of steps back. They showed no signs of giving up yet. Ruku quickly scrambled back up to her feet, rapier in hand, eyes flicking back and forth, looking for the next threat. She didn't have to wait long, however, as two men, one to her left and one to her right, shouted and charged at her with cutlasses, swinging wildly. Ruku's eyes widened in surprise as she saw the heavy blade swinging towards her. She ducked one swing from the right and deflected the other from her left with her rapier, though the weight of the blade against her own caused her to be struck off balance. She decided to embrace the fall, however, and rolled towards the ground to her right. In doing so, she was no longer there when the right man's blade swung back down. Ruku rolled back to her feet, now behind the man to her right, and lunged with the point of her blade, piercing the man in the right shoulder from behind, causing him to drop his cutlass and cry out in pain. While this solved one problem for Ruku, namely the problem of nearly being sliced open by a cutlass, it did put her in a bad position. She had moved too close to the circle of thugs, and no sooner had she pulled her blade back out of the man's shoulder that she felt several hands gripping her shoulders and arms, holding her in place. She growled out fiercely, but there were too many hands holding her. She could not break free. The men quieted down as the remaining man with the cutlass slowly moved forward, stepping over several men Ruku had injured. As he drew near to Ruku, his evil smile declared his less than honorable intentions. Ruku closed her eyes and grimaced as the man swung his blade upwards. She waited to feel the sharp metal slicing open her flesh, but instead she heard the rip of fabric. She opened her eyes and immediately blushed as red as her hair as she saw that the man had not cut her, but rather her shirt up the middle, exposing the pale skin of her torso and black small clothes. Ruku screamed angrily and struggled to break loose from the hands holding her in place, but again she could not break free. The man with the cutlass laughed wickedly at Ruku's display of defiance and moved the flat of his blade under Ruku's chin, forcing her to lift her head until she was looking directly at his face. "You're going to pay for not knowing your place, little girl. We're going to take your gold, then we're going to take your ship, and then we're going to take you." He began to laugh loudly, the group of men joining in with laughs and crude comments of their own. While the man began to speak at length detailing the incredibly improper things he and the crowd planned to do, they didn't notice one of the girls that worked in the nearby pub sneaking up behind the man with the cutlass. The girl did not escape Ruku's notice, however. Neither did the large cast-iron frying pan in the girl's right hand, nor the murderous look in the girl's eyes. When she saw the girl was nearly in striking distance, Ruku smirked at the man with the cutlass. "You know the problem with evil men like you?" Ruku asked. I am, actually. I'm the author of this. I figured I would start with one of my own stories. So, you know the problem with evil men like you? Ruku asked venomously. The man laughed at her and responded, "Oh, what would that be, little naive girl?" Ruku smirked and retorted, "You spend too much time monologuing." It's, self-published on Amazon. Yes, Rowan helped quite a bit with getting me to publish it. So Ruku smiled and retorted, "You spend too much time monologuing." At that moment, the kitchen girl swung her pan and hit the man squarely in the back of the head, with a sickening crunch and a loud reverberating bong sound. The man's eyes rolled back in his head and he collapsed to the ground. The men holding Ruku, shocked by what they had just witnessed. Congrats, I was just listening going, this is pretty good. Thank you very much. I'm about halfway done with the second one. So now that I think things have finally started to calm down with my life, I should be able to get back to writing it. So hopefully it'll come out soon. So let's see. So collapsed to the ground. The men holding Ruku, shocked by what they just witnessed, loosened their grip just enough that Ruku was able to wrench herself free, ripping her shirt further in the process. As she moved away from the remaining 8 men, Ruku slipped the front of her boot under the blade of her rapier and kicked the weapon up into her hand, backing up to stand next to the kitchen girl. Want to drop a link? Yeah. Let me grab that real quick. So here is the link for the book. And then here's the link. I think it came in after I was doing all the coffee explanation, but here's the link to the coffee that we're drinking tonight. All right. So where were we? Where we were is I want more coffee. Okay. So let's see. Ruku slipped the front of her boot under the blade of her rapier and kicked the weapon back up into her hand, backing up to stand next to the kitchen girl. As the 2 women stood back to back, Ruku commented back to the kitchen girl, "Thanks for the save. I'm Ruku. Who would have guessed that use for a frying pan?" The kitchen girl gave Ruku a cocky smirk and a wink and said, "I'm Jaina, and I know, right? Certainly not that poor bastard." That was about all the time the 2 women had for introductions, as one of the remaining 8 men yelled out a curse, and all 8 men rushed them at once. Jaina and Ruku stood back to back and began to fight off the remaining men, Ruku deflecting jabs from daggers and knives with her rapier, Jaina knocking men back and blocking punches with her iron pan. Pirate Rapunzel. Yeah. There are some I think subtle references to other things in the book if you look closely. Little nods to things that I enjoy. Before long, 6 more men were moaning and wailing on the ground, cradling and nursing their injuries, and the remaining 2 were running away, crying and screaming. When she was confident the danger had passed, Ruku finally relaxed and sheathed her rapier, walking over to where she had dropped her coat to retrieve it. She also sighed as she saw the state of her shirt, ripped up the middle with smaller rips all over the sleeves. Ruku decided to make the most of it and took the shirt off, folding it over into a makeshift wrap top, wrapping the fabric around her chest and tying it in the back with what was left of the sleeves. She slipped her coat back on and turned to Jaina with a smile. Excuse me. Oh, yeah. Rowan did the portrait of Ruku that I have. That's going to be the cover of the second book. And then she also helped me with editing the photograph for the cover that you see on Amazon for Shizukesa. There you go. So Jaina was a sight to behold. Even in a food-stained dress with soot on her cheeks, it was hard to ignore her natural beauty. Her vibrant blonde hair was styled in a cute bob, with the ends flared out just above her shoulders. Her eyes were green, bright, and to look into them made one think they hid some great mystery that stoked the imagination and curiosity of any who gazed too deeply into them. Her arms were bare and toned, showing the strength with which she had wielded an iron pan as a weapon, though still feminine in appearance. Ruku took pause as she took in all these little details about the woman in front of her. Before the pause could become awkward, however, Ruku reached out her hand to Jaina. "Great work back there. You really know your way in a fight." Jaina smiled back at Ruku, seeming to be making her observations of the grinning captain at the same time. "Thank you, Ruku. I grew up with several brothers and spent my youth on my father's ships, so I had to learn to fend for myself pretty early, she replied, preceded by a quiet giggle. You weren't too bad yourself. I can't believe you took on all those men by yourself, though. That was pretty foolish, my audacious captain. Jaina chuckled and gave Ruku a cocky, confident grin. Ruku gave the girl a sheepish smile and rubbed the back of her neck. I guess I might have misjudged how many of those mutton heads there were there. If you hadn't come along when you did, Ruku paused, suddenly realizing just how close she came to a tragic end. I would have been worse than dead. You have my eternal gratitude. With that, Ruku gave a bow with an exaggerated and feigned air of nobility, quickly turning to humor before she showed too much emotional vulnerability. Jaina laughed more loudly, covering her mouth as she shook her head at Ruku's silliness. "'Twas nothing, my noble lady. 'Tis the duty of every poor, common kitchen servant to come to the aid of one so fair, after all." Jaina replied with a stifled laugh, putting on that same exaggerated accent and speech as Ruku, followed by a curtsy. Ruku just stared at Jaina for a moment before they both broke out in laughter and giggles, and each embraced the other, still laughing as they separated and walked to a nearby bench and sat down. As they sat, Jaina looked over to Ruku and inquired, "So I heard you were looking for crew members. I'm a good cook, and I'm pretty bored of this place. Plus, the brutes around here will probably have it out for me after our little scuffle today. Think there might be room on your crew for a girl like me?" Ruku smiled and nodded. "I would be honored to have you join my crew, Jaina. You said you spent your youth on your father's ship. Do you have any skills other than cooking and fighting with cooking instruments?" Jaina nodded to Ruku and replied, "Yeah, I'm actually a pretty fair navigator. I used to plot out the best routes for my father, but after he passed, I couldn't really find a job on a ship. You know the saying, wide hips sink ships." Ruku nodded while gritting her teeth angrily. "Yes, I've heard that far too many times when I tried to get a job on a boat." Jaina nodded back, noting and sharing Ruku's frustration. "Well, it turns out I'm also a fair cook, so I caught passage to Kuwain, figuring if any crew is going to take on a lady navigator, they'll dock here at some point. I've just been biding my time since then, well, till you came along, that is." Jaina grinned wide. "Now I'm going to be a real-life navigator!" Jaina exclaimed excitedly. Ruku gave Jaina a lopsided smile, genuinely happy that she was able to provide the young girl with the opportunity she'd been dreaming of. "Shizuke's is just docked just down there." Ruku pointed towards the pier she'd come from. "I still need to find more members of the crew, so just go grab whatever gear you need from home and get aboard. You've got first pick the bunks in the crew quarters." Ruku gave the girl a cocky wink and hopped off the bench, turning to head towards the pub. "I'm going to sneak off. Have a good one, Raven. Look at your book for sure. Love the cover art." "Thanks! Have a good night. See you later." Let's see. Jaina gave an excited squeal and jumped up from the bench as well, happily wrapping her arms around Ruku from behind in a surprisingly strong bear hug. "Thank you, Captain!" Ruku let out a loud oof sound and blushed a little, unused to such displays of gratitude. "Hey, don't mention it, Jaina." Ruku chuckled a little awkwardly, slowly prying Jaina's arms off her to slip out of the hug. As she started walking a little more quickly towards the pub, she called back, "See you at the ship!" Jaina let out another excited squeal and ran off towards her home to gather her things. Chapter 5. The Spume Bar. Before she even reached the door, Ruku could hear the sound of a ramshackle piano and smell the wave of mixed odors hitting her in the face. The pub smelled of watered-down rot gut, sweat, and blood. Ruku forced herself not to gag as she opened the door and stepped in. She squinted as she allowed her eyes to adjust, the inside of the pub being very dimly lit. If Isley was a hive of criminals, and those with morally questionable professions, then the Spume Bar was a nerve center for it. Ruku saw men and women of all shapes, sizes, degrees of cleanliness, and levels of clothing. Were it not for the smell, it might have been a fascinating scene to sit back and watch, but Ruku was on a mission and was in no mood to loiter about. Ruku spotted the barkeep, at an open spot at the crowded bar, so she carefully moved forward, stepping over a drunken man snoring on the filthy floor. When she reached the seat, she asked for a rum and coffee. The rather rotund man scratched the exposed portion of his belly, which was poking out from his too small shirt, and just grunted at Ruku before setting down a dirty glass of clearish liquid that smelled more like lamp oil than something one would actually drink. The glass hit the old wooden bar with a loud thump, splashing some of the foul liquid onto the bar. Ruku reached into her coin purse and handed the man a couple of silver coins, trying very hard to quell her disgust as she stared at the glass. "Thanks, mister. I'm sure it's very good," Ruku responded to the elephantine man's grunt. The man just offered another inane grunt before turning to the other patrons, slamming down more dirty glasses of that same liquid, regardless of what was ordered. The man seemed relatively passive until one of the bar's patrons started to light a match to light his pipe. With a loud grunt, the obese overseer of the bar slapped the patron across the face, knocking the pipe from his mouth and blowing out the match in the process. The barkeep began to, quite literally, bark orders at the patron, pointing furiously to a crudely drawn sign on the wall that warned against open flames in the building. Given these recent developments, Ruku decided it would be best for her continued health to ignore the glass of whale oil beverage for now and look around for some men and women who could round out her crew. While Jaina was likable enough, the Shizukesa undoubtedly needed a larger crew than two to operate at full potential. Ruku was squinting at a fleshy mass of a person in the corner, trying to determine if the person was alive or dead, or if the mass was even human to begin with, for that matter, when a man tapped her on the shoulder, drawing her attention back. The man could be described as ruggedly handsome, a short stubble beard which looked like it had been groomed so as not to turn into a neck beard, steely blue eyes, and a quintessential Prince Charming style haircut. He wore a flowy shirt and even had black leather pants with a red stripe running up the side, and a smile so perfect Ruku half expected to hear a chime and see a sparkle come off one of the man's teeth. His appearance was so perfect, in fact. I'm sure they had a concept of a neck beard. I mean, they had razors and shaved and such. Pirate dude, bro. His appearance was so perfect, in fact, that rather than swoon or get flustered by the man, she merely broke out into very genuine laughter. The man, used to women swooning over him, was taken aback by the laughter and started looking around behind him to see what Ruku had been laughing. He was confused further by the lack of anything amusing behind him. He turned back with a look of pure befuddlement on his face, but quickly tried to recover, smiling and chuckling a bit nervously. I'm afraid I'm a bit lost on what is amusing, though I may just be distracted by your undefinable allure. Your beauty rivals even that of the sea, my God, I cannot talk tonight. Your beauty rivals even that of the sea, my enigmatic princess, the man declared in response to Ruku's laughter, before offering a shallow and flowery bow. I am Laszlo the Great, at your service. Full of broody. Ruku paused a moment, staring at Laszlo with slightly wide eyes, her expression indeterminable. After another moment or two, she burst out into laughter again, holding her stomach as she leaned against the bar, kicking her legs back and forth as she laughed to the point of tears. Oh, it's too much. You gotta stop, Laszlo. I can't take it. Ruku gasped out between guffaws. Laszlo arched a brow, that bewildered look returning to his face for a moment, till a spark of realization appeared on his features, and his expression changed to one of concern. Oh, gods. My poor dear, I'm so sorry. I've made you so nervous you've had a breakdown, into a hysterical fit. Please, miss, it is all right. Just try to breathe. Would it help if I hid my face for a moment? Laszlo inquired of the laughing captain. Ruku could not stop herself from laughing, the man in front of her seeming to her the most ridiculous thing she had ever encountered. Ooh, wait, you mean, does this whole perfect, provocative prince thing actually work on women? Ruku managed to choke out through her laughter. Laszlo's eyes went wide with first surprise until realization sunk in, and he felt the stabbing wound piercing into his pride, and his expression changed to pouty anger. Why, the nerve! I've never in my life been so insulted! Laszlo asserted before his expression softened once again. He was determined to win this hunt he had embarked upon. I'm merely concerned for your health, my beautiful princess. I wish only to know a goddess such as yourself and bask in your beauty. Ruku had finally managed to calm down and breathe a bit, but at the mention of her being a goddess, she lost it again and started to guffaw, tears streaming down her face as she kicked her feet until she lost her balance on the bar stool and let out a high-pitched yelp as she fell backwards, crashing onto the dirty floor. Laszlo let out a less than manly sounding gasp and scrambled to Ruku's aid, trying to hold her hand to help her up from the floor. Ruku, still giggling, took Laszlo's hand and allowed him to help her up, shaking the dirt and dust from her coat. Ruku chuckled again, winding down now as she quickly took her hand back from Laszlo's hold as soon as she was upright. Thanks for helping me up. Don't get any ideas, buddy. Ruku took her seat back, cleared her throat, and tried very hard not to laugh again as she turned her attention back to Laszlo. Now then, pining for my hand aside, how can I help you, Laszlo the Great? Ruku asked calmly. Laszlo looked more wounded than ever, but he was determined not to give up the fiery-haired captain. Or give up on the fiery-haired captain. In fact, Ruku's unusual reaction to him somehow made him all the more smitten with her. Laszlo cleared his throat and gave another much shorter and more plain bow. As I said, I am Laszlo, and aside from a deep and burning desire to be near your previous declarations aside, I also heard you're looking for new crew members for your vessel. I happen to be the greatest sword hand this side of the three seas, and I find myself bored and without purpose here in Isley. Also, my once expansive fortune, through a string of bad luck and unfortunate interactions with gentlemen of questionable legality, well, the fortune is more of a rainy day fund now, and I find that I, Laszlo the Great, for the first time in my glorious life, am in need of work, and I would very much like to sail with you. Ruku chuckled and cleared her throat. I see, Mr. Laszlo. Well, you are correct that I am looking for a new crew for my ship, the Suzukasa. I have a cook and navigator, but I need a good sword hand for the type of work we're likely to be doing. And since you've mentioned you had dealings of questionable legality, you should be comfortable with things like smuggling, piracy, privateering? Ruku asked with an arched brow, her gaze assessing the man now in a different light, trying to determine his worth as a member of her crew, rather than just a ridiculous suitor. Laszlo arched his brow in return. I am surprised a fine young lady like yourself would be speaking of things such as piracy. Surely you cannot mean to become an outlaw like the majority of the swine here, Laszlo said while motioning to the various patrons of the pub. Ruku gave a snide snicker and rolled her eyes. What's the old proverb? Don't judge a book by its cover? Ruku let her snicker transition into a lopsided smirk. Are you insinuating that you are any different from the lot in the establishment, Laszlo the Great? Ruku let her voice change, inflection to put a sarcastic pitch on Laszlo's name. Why, yes, of course, Laszlo explained in response. You see, I am but a traveler, merely passing through this place, and I naturally assumed a lady of your stature and refinement would be much the same as myself. I may have been mistaken, however. Ruku narrowed her eyes at the man. What do you mean, someone of my stature? Just what are you implying, you ass? Ruku's voice rose in volume, and so did a few heads in the pub, looking over to the commotion. I scrolled down and lost my place. Looking over to the commotion. I entertained your pompous act when you introduced yourself because it was amusing. But if you want to sail with me, you need to get one thing through your pig skull. I'm the captain. Period. Ruku moved off her stool, standing uncomfortably close to Laszlo as she snapped at him. Neither my height nor what's inside my pants will have any bearing whatsoever on your respect towards that fact, and your compliance with my orders. You savvy? Laszlo's eyes grew wider as Ruku moved up in his face. At first, he was uncomfortable having the object of his infatuation so physically close to him. However, as Ruku began speaking more, he started to truly fear what this woman might do if he kept pushing his luck. Laszlo was very unaccustomed to anyone speaking to him in such a manner, much less a young woman shorter than himself. While the previous wound to his pride was compounded by his present proverbial dressing down by Ruku, Laszlo decided it was probably best to listen to the woman. He had found very few promising prospects for work, and it was true that he had no particular qualms getting his hands a little dirty. As Ruku finished her rant, she took a step back, Now, if you're interested in the job, I have a few things to teach you first. Are you in? Ruku inquired. Laszlo took a brief moment to inhale and exhale before nodding. Yes, ma'am. I would like to join your crew if you'll have me. I mean, not have me. I mean, like, join the... As Laszlo was stammering, he was interrupted by Ruku stepping past him and swinging her foot at the back of his knee. The result was him falling backwards onto his rear with a loud oof sound, cutting off his stammering. Ruku chuckled as she continued walking past him towards the door. Lesson 1. Your enemies seldom fight fair. Always be on your guard. Now follow me outside. We're going to see how good of a fencer you really are. Ruku continued out the door, raising her hand to wave at Laszlo without skipping a beat, not even glancing over her shoulder to see if he was following. As Laszlo felt the sudden thud on his usually pampered posterior, the impact caused him to widen his eyes once again in shock and surprise. He truly had not seen that coming in the slightest, and he was unsure how much more of a beating his pride could take, especially with the sudden blow to his backside. Still, though, he was more intrigued than ever by this woman who seemed to keep her wits about her, even when enraged. To think someone clearly smaller and younger than him, not to mention a female, would dare talk down to him like he was a sophomoric student, it baffled the poor man's mind. Laszlo scrambled to his feet, trying futilely to brush off the dirt and grime his clothing had acquired from the floor, and called after Ruku before rushing out the door, to the eruption of laughter behind him from the pub's patrons. As Laszlo emerged outside, he saw Ruku brandishing her rapier and saw that she had already removed her coat, something that made him blush as he saw her in the makeshift wrap she had fashioned from the remains of her shirt. Ruku smirked at his reaction and winked. Something wrong with your face? You seem to be turning a little red. As Laszlo flushed and stammered to reply, again distracted, Ruku closed the distance between them and swiftly lunged with her rapier, moving to stab through the right side of his shirt only, trying her best to avoid any fleshy parts of the man. Laszlo's many years of training kicked in at the attack, and without a thought, his body reacted to the threat. He drew his rapier with his left hand and spun to the side, his own blade deflecting Ruku's, while he ended in a fighting stance facing her, blade at the ready. Ruku grinned. All right, so you've had some training, I'll give you that. Nice recovery, Laszlo. Laszlo seemed to only just now notice what had happened, and he grinned in a princely manner as he heard Ruku's praise. Why, thank you, my lovely captain. As I said, I'm the greatest sword hand this... Laszlo was again interrupted, as Ruku stepped back while he was speaking and kicked a pile of sand up at the man's face. Caught off guard by such a dirty fighting technique, Laszlo took the full brunt of the sand to the face, the grit getting in his mouth and eyes, briefly blinding him and making him sputter. As he tried to recover, Ruku expeditiously slid behind Laszlo and slapped the flat of her blade across the man's rear end, invoking a surprised yelp from him. Laszlo hastily turned around and backed away from Ruku, growling quietly in frustration. Damn it, woman! Kicking dirt in my eyes is cheating! Ruku laughed softly and nodded. Yes, it is. Lesson 2. Use whatever advantage you can find when you fight someone, even if it's dirty or cheating. This isn't some fencing tournament, it's life and death. If you find an angle to exploit, a weakness to take advantage of, a misconception to capitalize, you take it. Picked up tricks from the early... yeah. Ruku stated authoritatively. Ruku sheathed her rapier and retrieved her coat, slipping it back on. Now then, I'm curious how good of a kisser you are. You're Mr. Suave, so surely you've had some experience in the matter. Come here and show me, Ruku said with a wink. Laszlo eyed the wily captain up and down for a moment and shook his head. Oh no, I know where this is going. You offered me something I want more than anything right now, and at the last minute, you knee me in the groin or claw my face or I don't know, something else bad, Laszlo said, very flustered. Ruku giggled and winked again at the man. Oh no, I was serious this time, but if the idea of kissing me is that disagreeable... Ruku shrugged and smirked back at the man, and paused as Laszlo looked to be having an obvious argument with himself inside his mind. Of course, it could also just be tooling with you, Ruku stated, walking away slowly, making a show of swaying her hips as she called back to Laszlo. At any rate, you got the job. Go grab your gear and get to the ship. She's behind you down the pier. Oh, and don't throw yourself at my navigator, Jaina. Try to behave, huh? Laszlo just stood slack-jawed as Ruku walked away, not quite sure what had just happened. He was fairly positive Ruku had no intention of kissing him, but the prospect began to haunt his thoughts. He began to torture himself over if he should have risked more torture, on the off chance that she had been genuine. A few moments after Ruku announced that he had obtained the job, it finally sunk in and shook him from his internal strife. Before Ruku could get out of earshot, Laszlo called out to her, "I won't let you down, my lovely captain." With that declaration, Laszlo began to make his way towards the Shizukesa, gingerly rubbing his sore backside as he went. Excuse me. Chapter 6. The rest of the gang. Having found 2 for her crew, Ruku set off towards some of the other docks in search of more hands she could hire to man the Shizukesa. It was late afternoon by the time she reached the West Isley docks. When she arrived, however, she was amazed by the sight of it. The docks were like a network of mooring lines, bridges, catwalks, and planks. How anyone navigated that was a mystery to her, but there were men clambering up and down the walkways, tending to lines and cargo, yelling back and forth. It was like watching ants that had consumed large amounts of coffee before running convoluted races across a spider's web. As she walked along the edge of the tessellating docks, she spotted some men slowly moving along the edges as well, lighting oil lamps for the evening. It had not grown dark yet, but there was likely only another couple hours before the lamps would be needed in order to see anything in this gloomy city. As Ruku passed the men lighting the lanterns, she spotted a forlorn-looking cluster of young men sitting on the side of one of the criss-crossing docks. And the water next to it sat a half-sunken ship. The ill-fated vessel had large portions of the hull missing and jagged patterns, and it looked as if the boat had only just barely made it to port before sinking to a halt next to the dock. Ruku went up to the group of men and nodded towards the derelict vessel. "This your boat?" Ruku inquired. One of the men, looking a bit younger than the rest, looked up at Ruku and nodded. "Oh, yes, ma'am. Well, at least it used to be," the man replied. "Looks like you took quite a lot of damage. I'm surprised you made it into port at all," Ruku commented. The younger man nodded again, his shaggy, dirty blonde hair falling in his face as he did. He reached up and moved the hair from his face before scratching at his bare chest briefly. Yes, ma'am. We was getting chased by some pirates. They was the Severn Dragoon ones. You know, the real nasty ones. Anyway, our old captain told me and the boys here to give 'em hell. We did for a while, but then we took a hit to one of our guns, and it got a hairline crack along the barrel. I told the captain we shouldn't use that gun, but he wouldn't listen. He made my cousin, Bo Flintlock was his name. Captain made him fire that gun anyway, and well, it blew a hole clean through the side of the ship. Poor Bo. The man stopped to sniffle and wipe his eyes with the back of his dirty hand. Poor old Bo, he got ripped to shreds, and the captain too. First mate, he got us back here with all of us bailing water as fast as we could, and then though the old ship just gave out and sank right here. She sank along with me and my boys' jobs and prospects. The old first mate said he was gone, going to find some kind of farming job or something. Guessing he had his fill of Warren and other pirates and whatnot. The man stood up and wiped his dirty hand on his slightly less dirty pants, and extended his hand to Ruku. "My name's Bester, by the way. Bester Flintlock. These fellas here is my cousins. They're all Flintlocks too, and we's a great crew of gunners if you're hiring, miss." Ruku took the extended hand despite it being dirty. You know, that's not who I had in mind when I was writing Bester, but it's not a bad comparison. He definitely has that same kind of accent as Scooter. Let's see. Ruku took the extended hand despite it being dirty, and nodded to Bester, a nod that conveyed not only greeting but sympathy for his predicament. "Well, it just so happens I am looking for more sailors to join my crew. I just have one question before you're hired. How did you escape Severn Dragoon pirates with a gaping hole in your ship?" Ruku inquired. "Oh, that? Well, we was pretty close to Isley here already, so we just dumped everything we could off the ship, even the cannons, which was a hard thing for us Flintlocks to do. But we did what you had to, you know. Anyways, we just made a beeline for Isley here, and well, you know how this city feels about Severn Dragoon. As soon as we was close enough for the ships here to see our flag and what was nipping at our stern, folks here turned out in droves, running those dragoons off with their tail between their legs. It is an awful impressive sight to see, miss, replied Bester. Ruku nodded to the dirty man with a smile. Bet it was. I'm glad to hear there's some honor among thieves here. We're all potentially competition, I suppose, but anyone here's better than a dragoon dog any day. Dragoon dog any day. Ruku replied with another short nod. My ship, the Shizukesa, is over on the dock near the Spoon Bar. Go get your men and grab any gear you have and head on over. I'll see you back at the ship, Gunny, she said with a lopsided grin to Bester. Ruku was glad she was not only able to nearly round out her crew, but she was able to rescue some folks like herself from a bad situation. Those boys could have easily ended up destitute and homeless, or worse had she not come along. With just a couple of positions left to fill now, Ruku headed out of the heart of the pirate district of Isley and into the more respectable area. More respectable, of course, being a relative term in this place. She was merely going from dealing with pirates to dealing with thieving sailors, the distinction being quite a subtle one. When Ruku arrived at the next district, she noted that the air seemed a little lighter and the streets just a touch brighter, despite it still being nearly nightfall. She needed to find a first mate and some kind of doctor or surgeon if possible, and this seemed like the most likely area of town to find someone with medical training. She spotted a bar that looked to be a finer establishment than the pub down by the ship, so she decided to start looking there. Just as she was about to step through the open door, however, and Rowan, I think you know who's coming next. So, just as... where'd it go? Just as she was stepping through the open door, however, she was hit square in the chest by a body flying headfirst through the doorway. Completely unprepared for that particular surprise, Ruku went flying back with the body landing flat on her back. Ruku went flying back with the body, landing flat on her back with a thud. The impact knocked the wind out of her, and she groaned as she tried to recover as quickly as she could, uncertain if she was being targeted or was simply the victim of unfortunate timing. She reached up to try to move the body off of her and blushed as she realized in her dazed state her hands had ended up pushing the person up off by the chest, and her hands were not presently feeling hard muscled pecs, but rather something much softer and malleable. Ruku's eyes went wide as she looked down to where her hands had ended up, and then up into two very angry, very fierce-looking eyes. Yes. The woman who had landed on top of her scrambled up to her feet, crossing her arms over her chest as she did. The hell are you doing, you perv? What's the big idea? You just grope up anyone that comes flying through a door? Is that it? I'd have sliced you up right here for that. The woman's ranting was cut off as a bottle came flying through the air from the bar and smacked her in the back of the head with a soft thud. The woman stopped yelling for just a moment and just stood there, blinking slowly. Ruku was worried that the woman might have sustained some serious injury to her head, but after just a moment, the woman was back to her animated self. She grabbed the back of her head and let out a very dramatic cry, stomping her feet in place. Ow! That hurts! She yelled out to no one in particular, but turned her attention quickly to the open doorway again. Jarvis, I know you didn't just throw a bottle at me. I will come in there and I will cut off your toes, you hear me? I will... She paused as another bottle flew through the air, and she ducked just in time before standing back up and continuing her yelling. Jarvis, you cheap ass, you throwing more at me than I owe you. Now you're just being spiteful. Don't make me come back in there. The woman finished yelling, at least for the moment. From inside the building, someone, presumably Jarvis, yelled back out, Shut the hells up, Zevi, or I'll make my muscle here do more than just throw you out for not paying your tab. Zevi made a very rude gesture towards the open doorway and turned back towards Ruku, before addressing her again. Again, however, she bent down and picked up one of the bottles that had been thrown at her. The half-full bottle had miraculously not shattered, and Zevi pulled the cork out with her teeth before spitting the cork out in the street and chugging down about a third of what was left. Now what are you looking at, perv? She glared at a somewhat dumbfounded Ruku, who was still lying on the ground, only propped up on her elbows, staring up at Zevi. I'm very sorry, miss. I didn't mean to, feel you up or anything. I was just trying to get up, and, well, when you flew into me, I got a little dazed and didn't see where my hands were going. Is your head all right from that bottle? Ruku replied to the girl and finally pushed herself up off the ground. Dazed, huh? Zevi smirked at Ruku, then gave her a wide, cocky smile. Yeah, I have that effect on most people. Zevi chugged down another third of the remaining liquid in the bottle she was holding. Do I look like a miss to you, lady? She said with a tone dripping with brash self-confidence. Ruku took a moment to actually pay attention to the girl's appearance and had to admit, while Zevi looked very feminine, she certainly did not look like a woman who would match the formal address of lady. Zevi was about Ruku's height, which was a little below average. While she was very skinny, scrappy, and clearly fit, she was more toned than bulky with muscles, and still retained very feminine curves. Her fashion, however, certainly did not leave much room for the mistake of her sex, as the only attire was a tied-off shirt which left her belly exposed, short cut-off pants that looked more like small clothes than actual pants, and finally a pair of boots that were devoid of laces or buckles. Okay, good night. Zevi's hair was a mix of blonde, blue, and green, though it did look clean, suggesting she had somehow dyed it. The multicolored hair was long and tied back in a ponytail. I guess not. Zevi, was it? Anyways, I'm sorry for getting unintentionally handsy with you earlier. If you don't mind my asking, what was your tab in there, and why were they so violent in getting you out of there? I mean, I'd expect this down by the docks, but this area seems to shall we say, value discretion and silence a little more? Inquired Riku. Zevi just snorted a laugh and shrugged, finishing off the contents of her bottle before throwing it over her shoulder, where it shattered in the street. Why do you care, lady? Not like you owe me anything. Zevi started to walk away slowly, but spoke over her shoulder. If you want to know the story, though, you can come with me to the next bar and have a drink with me. You're kind of cute, but you're buying, you hear? Ruku blushed at Zevi's backhanded compliment, but followed her. Ruku's curiosity was piqued. The girl was unlike any she had ever seen or even heard stories about, and she wanted to learn more about her, so she followed quickly. Ruku was used to being the one dishing out the sharp witticisms, and felt she needed to reply in kind. Yeah, well, you're not too bad to look at either, Zevi. Wait, why had she said that? Ruku thought to herself. That wasn't really much of an insult. In fact, it was basically a compliment. Why couldn't she think of something witty to say around this girl? Anyways, I'm Captain Ruku of the Shizukesa. Nice to meet you, and, sure, I can buy the first round, Ruku said while walking next to Zevi. Zevi just chuckled with a smirk, not looking to her side to speak directly to Ruku, but rather she just kept walking and looking forward as she spoke. Well, Miss Fancy Pants Captain, we're going over to my friend Li Shin's place. I owe him money too, but he's too scared of me to kick me out. Zevi laughed brashly and loudly. And you're paying all right, Red. I'm thirsty as hells and my story ain't cheap. Now, if you're wanting to get to know me a little more... if you're wanting to get to know me a little more. Zevi turned to Ruku while they both walked and gave her a flirtatious wink, letting out a cheeky laugh at the blush this elicited from Ruku. Still unsure how to handle this girl, Ruku just blushed at her flirtations and nodded. She was still struggling to gain her proverbial balance around Zevi, but Ruku felt that they had been literally thrown together for a reason, and was helplessly curious to find out what set of circumstances could produce a person like this. It wasn't too long before they reached their destination, a bar called Li Shin's Liquors and Spirits. The two women stepped inside and took a couple of seats at the bar. The proprietor, Li himself, was behind the bar and gave Zevi a disapproving yet cautious glare. Zevi, you know I can't serve you anything. You still owe me 25 gold for your tab. Gold, Zevi! I can't afford to keep floating your drinking problem. Li declared angrily, though he did instinctively duck down as soon as he had finished speaking. Zevi rolled her eyes and shrugged. Steady yourself, Li. I got a new girlfriend here who's agreed to pay for my drinks for the night, Zevi said while giving Ruku another wink. Ruku blushed again, but was getting a better handle of herself around this woman. She nodded to Li and then smirked at Zevi. I'll actually do one better. I will pay for 2 drinks, and if her story is as interesting as she claims, then I'll pay the entire tab, Ruku declared to Li while staring at Zevi. Zevi's eyes went wide and she snapped her gaze to Ruku. Bull! No way you got that kind of coin on you, Red. If you're trying to impress me, don't bother. I'm not really impressed by anything. Ruku reached into her coat and pulled out a small bag of coins and dropped it on the bar. Still keeping her steady gaze at Zevi, Li immediately snatched up the bag and looked inside. Sure enough, there were gold coins in there. Ah, very well. What will you girls want then? Li said, while quietly tucking the bag under the bar. Zevi's eyes narrowed while staring at Ruku, and Ruku stared right back, a cocky smirk on her face. Both girls kept staring at each other down as they called out loudly, in unison, "Rum!" Lee just rolled his eyes and shrugged, unsure of what exactly was going on with these two, other than some sort of competition. Having all the gold, however, Lee didn't really care to know the story. He just grabbed a bottle of mid-range rum and a couple of glasses and set them in front of the two women before going to tend to another customer. Ruku finally broke their unspoken staring contest and poured 2 glasses of the rum. She took a sip of hers and leaned back on her stool, her back angled against the bar so as not to fall off. "Well, Zevi, looks like you got a story to tell," Ruku said and took another sip of her rum. Zevi took her glass and downed the whole thing in one gulp before refilling the glass and calling out to Lee. "See that, Lee? I didn't spill a drop. I ain't got no drinking problem, so shut it." Lee just threw up his hands with an exasperated sigh. "I don't know why I try to look out for you, Zevi. You do whatever you want. I don't care anymore." Zevi just shrugged and downed another shot of rum. "Yeah, whatever helps you sleep at night, old man," she shouted. Ruku arched a brow at Zevi. You going to stop stalling, girl, or are you going to spill the beans?" After a third shot of rum, Zevi cleared her throat and turned to Ruku again. "I have to prepare for this kind of shit, alright, Red? This needs a minimum of 3 hits of rum." She cleared her throat once more and then leaned back on her stool in much the same way Ruku was, sipping her rum every so often as she told her tale. Let's see. You already know everyone here calls me Zevi. My actual name is Xenia. I do a little of this, a little of that, mostly thieving and mercenary work, but believe it or not, I used to be a fair medic." Zevi took another full shot of rum and refilled her glass before continuing. "See, my old man, he used to be an officer in the Royal Navy, right? Well, Mom died when I was a little girl, and he didn't want to leave me with his in-laws, so he used his pull as an officer to get me on the ship with him." Zevi snorted and shook her head. "Sailors on that ship hated my guts for it, too. Damn pigs. They made sure my life was hell whenever they could. My old man was too busy to see what they were doing. I mean, I guess he tried his best, but he was a real lousy parent. Anyways, ship surgeon took a liking to me, said I reminded him of his daughter or some story like that. He taught me how to do a lot of medicine stuff, and hell, anything was better than having those pigs bully me around, so I spent a lot of time down there with the doc. Wasn't too bad, I guess, but we got sent out on a really long voyage, some exploration bowl or other mission. About 2 months out at sea, we got hit hard by another country's fleet. Everybody lost it, man. There was bullets and cannonballs everywhere. We lost my old man, the doctor, hell, even the damn ship's cook got hit. I was, like 16 at the time, I think. Anyways, we got out of that, but I was the only one left on the ship that knew any kind of medicine or surgery, so guess who got to try to sew all those idiots back together? Zevi took another shot and refilled her glass again. 16 years old, little Miss Xenia did. That's who. I got them all patched up as best I could. Had to watch a few of them die with my shaking hands in their guts, trying to put them back together. There's a dozen different kinds of screwed up, Red. Not a place for any 16-year-old girl, that's for sure. Anyways, it was all over. Scroll too far. Not a place for any 16-year-old girl, that's for sure. Anyways, when it was all over, the captain said, "Still have a mission to do," so we kept going. Now, they couldn't get rid of me because I was on their only medic, but they sure as hell made sure I wasn't part of their crew. Zevi turned her head and spit on the floor with a grunt of disgust. Lee spoke up from across the room. "Hey, no spitting on floor!" Zevi just gave the old man a rude gesture and continued. Those pigs weren't above using a 16-year-old girl for the kind of things, you might expect that they wanted. As long as I could still patch those bastards up, the captain didn't care. Guess he thought they might mutiny or something otherwise. Some bullshit like that. Zevi took another shot of rum and then got a wicked smile on her face. Of course, I got my revenge eventually. Didn't matter who it was, they'd eventually end up on my cutting table, needing some bullet hole treated or some other wound. I couldn't outright kill them, or the captain would throw me off the ship, only medic or not. So I just studied the old doc's books, and I learned all kinds of ways to make people die without evidence. Zevi shrugged. Went on like that for a full year and a half before we made it back home. I took the pay my old man and the doc would have received, kicked off for the furthest backwater place I could find where none of those sailors or their families would come looking for me. Just in case any of them got ideas or something. Besides, it's not like I wanted anything to do with what was left of my family. I had nothing keeping me there. Zevi shrugged and downed a final shot of rum before setting the glass upside down in the bar. And that's how I ended up here, taking the odd merc job here and there, doing some medicine when I have to. So now you know, Red. Still find me irresistible and fascinating? Zevi smirked and gave a quiet, bitter laugh. Gods, that is... Wow. I'm sorry that happened to you, Zevi. Ruku replied, a little stunned by how dark the girl's tale was and how much she'd gone through. Zevi didn't look to be much more than 19 or 20, and she'd already seen and gone through more than probably most seasoned soldiers. Zevi just rolled her eyes and shrugged. Ain't looking for your pity, Red, just booze money. Zevi got a cold expression on her face before her face lit up with an idea. Well, I mean, unless that pity's gonna get me laid. Zevi smirked and winked at Ruku. Ruku's face went beet red, but she managed to keep her composure otherwise, and just shook her head. Not likely. Zevi just chuckled and leaned back on the stool again, and shrugged. Can't blame a girl for trying. Ruku managed to get her blushing mostly under control and set her glass down. Well, if you're looking for coin, turns out I'm in need of a decent medic on my ship, and another sword as well. Sounds like you could fill both jobs quite nicely. Are you interested? Ruku inquired. You mean me work for you, Red? I'm not sure you could handle me, sweetie. You seem to get flustered when I wink at you. I can only imagine what you'd do if you saw me naked. Ships are close quarters, after all. Zevi responded with an amused tone. Ruku blushed so hard she was sure her nose would start bleeding any moment if she got any more embarrassed. She started to speak, but Zevi's reaction to her blush made her pause. When Zevi saw just how red Ruku had become, she threw her head back and laughed so hard that she lost her balance and fell back off her stool. In the process, she banged the back of her head on the bar before crumpling onto the floor in drunken unconsciousness. Lee ran over as soon as he heard the crash and put his palm over his face with a sigh. That girl, nothing but trouble. But she has a good heart down in there under all that. Lee looked to Ruku. She's just getting more trouble here, but you look like you might handle her. Maybe you help her get over her past? You take her to the ship before she wakes up. Is what best for her. Ruku looked down at Zevi passed out and drooling on the floor and sighed. She needed a medic, and this girl needed a home. Ruku knew the girl would be trouble, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she and Zevi were meant to cross paths here. Ruku couldn't deny her attraction to the girl either. Even if it wasn't necessarily a physical attraction, she was drawn to Zevi in a way she couldn't quite put her finger on yet. It was a mystery that she would have plenty of time to unravel if Zevi was on her ship, though. Ruku made up her mind and nodded to Lee. All right, I'll hire her on, and I'll do my best to help her out. Still have a ship to run, but I'll do what I can for her. With that being said, Lee thanked Ruku, gave her back her bag of coins as a thank you, and leaned down to kiss Zevi's forehead, in the way a father might kiss his little girl goodbye. With that, Lee snapped his fingers and called two of his bouncers over, who helped Ruku get Zevi back to the Shizukesa. Chapter 7. Shenanigans. There was barely any light when Ruku decided to prepare the ship for sail. The ship could use a couple more crew members, a first officer especially, but Ruku decided it would be best to set sail sooner rather than later. She was confident in that little trap she had laid for her old crew and captain, but she knew the captain was smart, and she didn't want to count on that trap holding him forever. There was still a chance he could come here looking for her. Ruku stepped out onto the main deck and leaned against the railing, looking out over the water, trying to decide on a destination. The sun finally peeked up over the horizon as she stood there, the golden light rays caressing the side of her face as a warm breeze blew by, causing the sails to gently roll as if the ship were eager to start moving. It was a perfect, serene scene, peaceful and tranquil. It was quickly brought to a close, however, as Ruku heard a loud crash below decks followed by screaming, cursing, and threats. Zevi had awoken from her drunken coma, and it didn't take her long to figure out what had happened. She threw a wooden chair across the middle section of the ship, just below the main deck. As she stormed up to the main deck, she was shouting and yelling the entire way. Red, what's the big idea of kidnapping me? I'm going to kick your ass when I get up there. You hear me? You better run, little girl. Zevi called out, but after a few moments of causing this commotion, the effects of her hangover suddenly caught up with her, and she went both quiet and pale. She quickly ran up the stairs and leaned over the railing on the main deck, expelling the contents of her stomach and groaning. Oh, gods, what happened about me? Zevi pushed herself up off the railing slowly, one hand going to her head as the other wiped her mouth. Red, did you drug me? Zevi inquired in an accusatory, albeit much quieter tone. Ruku couldn't help but giggle as she saw Zevi's reaction to her situation and hangover. No, you pretty well did that to yourself with all that rum last night, Zevi, Ruku replied. Zevi groaned and gave Ruku an evil, contemplative glare. Ruku was sure that Zevi was trying to determine if she should try to hit her or if she should hug the deck while the world stopped spinning. Red, as soon as I can see fewer than 3 of you, I am going to punch you. But for now, start explaining. Why the hell am I on your boat? Zevi groused. Ruku giggled again and moved to Zevi, taking her arm as she helped keep her upright as they both moved to the railing. I didn't kidnap you per se. Li Shen asked me to bring you with me after you passed out and smacked your head on the bar. Believe it or not, he was actually really concerned about you. It's kind of sweet, actually, Ruku explained. I can't take that kind of sweet stappy stuff right now. It's making my hangover worse. Zevi groaned out. That only explains why the old man kicked me out of the bar. Why'd you bring me along? You don't seem like the slaving type, so what is it? Couldn't get enough of my charming personality. Zevi laughed very briefly before immediately regretting it. She stopped her laugh abruptly and leaned over the railing, vomiting again. Ruku chuckled and gently rubbed Zevi's back between her shoulder blades. A comforting gesture to hopefully help with the girl's nausea. Yes, your winning personality just cuts through all my defenses, and I turn to putty around you, Zevi. I'm so obsessed that I just had to have you near me always, Ruku replied with a very dry, sarcastic tone. Zevi managed a weak chuckle and subtle nod before retching again over the side of the ship. Actually, in addition to Lee's pleas for you, I also need a medic for my ship here, and so, in your unconscious state, I let Lee answer my job offer for you, Ruku replied. About this time, the rest of the crew had been awoken by the commotion and had started investigating. Laszlo was the first on the deck, wearing nothing but some fancy silk sleeping pants, his belt, and rapier, and untied boots. Ah, my lovely captain, is everything all right? I heard a crash and curses and came to investigate, Laszlo inquired as he approached. Is this, lady all right as well? She would seem to be experiencing some gastro distress. Laszlo probed further. Ruku stifled a chuckle as she saw Laszlo's ridiculous getup, but responded quickly. Yes, everything's fine. Our good doctor here just had a few too many drinks last night. You know how physicians can be, feeling immune to everything us mortals are affected by. Ruku gave Laszlo a jovial wink to indicate she was teasing the girl. Zevi looked up at Ruku slowly and growled, I'm gonna kick your... She started to threaten Ruku, but was cut off by another wave of nausea. Laszlo looked at the two women with a confused expression. She's the doctor? Laszlo asked incredulously. I see. Well, if I could be of any assistance, please do let me know. Laszlo backed away slowly and started to head back towards the stairs to go below deck. Will do, Laszlo. And Laszlo? Ruku called out. Yes, Captain, Laszlo replied. For God's sake, go put on a shirt and real pants on, Ruku ordered with a soft laugh in her tone. Laszlo blushed as if suddenly realizing he had run up without proper clothes. Ah, yes, right away, Captain. As Laszlo turned on his heels to rush back to his quarters to change, he did not pay attention to anything behind him and, as a result, barreled right into Jaina, who had just emerged, fully dressed, from below decks to see what the commotion was. The two clattered to the deck, Jaina on her back with Laszlo falling on top of her. Jaina looked up at Laszlo with a surprised expression and a slight blush. Excuse me, but you seem to be crushing me, sir. Could you please get off? She politely asked Laszlo. Laszlo's eyes went wide as he recovered and realized who he had fallen over. He scrambled to his feet quickly and gave a deep bow. My sincerest apologies, miss. I'm afraid I was not watching where I was going. Laszlo apologized. Jaina picked herself up slowly and brushed off the front of her simple dress and smiled warmly. It's all right, mister. No harm done. She replied and blushed a bit more as she noticed that Laszlo was shirtless. Laszlo nodded to Jaina before quickly running below to change. As he did this, Jaina walked up to Ruku and Zevi. Hey, Cap. Everything all right? I heard someone swearing like... Jaina chuckled to herself. Well, like a sailor, really. I wanted to come out and check on that and meet all the new people, she said cheerfully. Is our new crewmate all right? She kind of looks like death. Zevi pulled herself up off the rail long enough to glare at Jaina. You have no idea, little girl. Zevi looked back to Ruku. Is she always this chipper? Ugh, my hangover can't handle chipper. Zevi groaned again. Jaina just giggled and gave a cute smile. I never really thought about it, but I guess I am always cheery like this. Tell you what, though, I got familiar with the galley last night, so why don't I go make us all some coffee? She asked enthusiastically. Zevi turned around and grabbed Jaina by the shoulders of her dress and looked at her with a wild look in her eyes. Yes! Coffee! Now! Stop talking! Go! Zevi muttered out. Ruku just rolled her eyes and nodded her agreement to Jaina that coffee would indeed be a good idea. Yes, thank you very much, Jaina. Jaina cautiously removed herself from Zevi's grip and took a couple of steps back before speaking somewhat more loudly and cheerfully than normal. Okay, Cap, coming right up! Jaina smiled brightly and scampered off to the galley eagerly. Zevi groaned and leaned back against the railing. My gods, I am on a ship full of morons. Ruku rolled her eyes again. Yes, well, I do have a ship to run, so I can't spend too much time babysitting my ship's surgeon. You gonna stay out of trouble, I trust? Ruku said more as a statement than a question. Yeah, Red, I'll be a good girl, and I promise not to break anything else today, as long as these morons leave me alone. Zevi replied, waving her hand dismissively back at Ruku, while she leaned against the railing for support. Thrilled to hear it. Ruku replied dryly before heading below decks to check on Bester and his men. As Ruku reached the gun deck, she saw the flintlock boys clambering back and forth like a bunch of ants. They were frantically moving barrels of gunpowder and cannonballs, running huge brushes through the guns, and kicking up an alarming amount of dust and soot. Ruku coughed and waved her hand in front of her face to clear the dust. Gunny, what the hells are you boys doing? Ruku called out. Bester showed up in front of her suddenly, almost as if materializing out of the dust in the air. It was so sudden, in fact, that it took Ruku by surprise a bit, and she leaned back suddenly as he appeared. Hey, Captain. Me and my cousins here, we're figuring this being a ship, for illegal work and such, might need to have these guns ready to go to war if needed. So I told them, boys, we better set up shop, get these guns clean enough to eat out of. Also do some drills. So that's what we've been doing for the last hour or so. Sorry for all the dust, Captain. Should clean up soon. We're almost done. Ruku arched a brow but nodded. Very well, carry on. But try not to make things too dusty. We still need to be able to see and breathe down here, after all. Ah, Captain, replied Bester, before he went back to speeding around the deck, supervising his cousins and doing his fair share of the work as well. Ruku spent the next hour or so checking the cargo hold, inspecting the hull, and making sure all needed repairs were made to the ship before they set sail out of the port. She noted that their gold stores, while still substantial, were significantly lower after her encounter with those dragoons the other day, and what she had to pay the new crew in advances to gear up and get a few last-minute supplies that the ship needed. By the time everything had been loaded, repaired, and prepped, the sun had risen substantially, indicating it was somewhere around 10 in the morning. Now that the ship was ready to set sail, the only thing they needed was a destination, or at least a heading. Ruku had the crew assemble on the main deck to discuss their first trip. Let me get some more of the coffee here. My throat is getting dry. That's better. So Ruku had the crew assemble on the main deck to discuss their first trip. Now that the Shizukeza is ready to set sail, we need a destination. Jaina, Zevi, you two have had your ear to the ground in Isley longer than any of us here. Where can we pick up some smuggling work, or maybe hit some royals? I want to stay away from the dragoons for now if we can, Ruku inquired. Zevi spoke up first. Hit the royals? Hells yes! I know a few routes those stuck-up pigs take. I'd love to get a chance to cause a little mayhem in their perfect little world. Jaina chimed in as well once Zevi's outburst was finished. Well, Cap, I do know there's some smuggling jobs available up near the coast of Vinland. That shouldn't be more than a few days' trip from here. Maybe we could go take on one of those jobs smuggling, smuggle some goods into royal territory, and maybe we could hit some of their ships on the way back out, she offered happily. Zevi gave Jaina a sideways, surprised glance. Maybe you're not as stupid as I thought, little Daisy. Jaina gave Zevi an awkward, questioning glance back. Thanks, I think? Ruku nodded thoughtfully. I like both ideas, and I think Jaina's suggestion of combining them is excellent. Any objections? If so, now's the time, sailors. Excuse me. Ruku waited a few moments to allow for objections. She heard none, but did notice Bester raising his hand a bit meekly. Gunny, you have something to contribute? Yes, Captain, if that's all right and all, he replied inquisitively. Ruku nodded. Of course. Once I've made a decision, I'll expect everyone to follow it or come talk to me in private. But until I've made a decision and issued orders, I want everyone to feel free to speak up. She paused and glanced over at Zevi with constructive contributions. Zevi gave Ruku a "who, me?" expression of innocence at this, but otherwise remained quiet. Bester nodded in appreciation to Ruku and spoke up a bit louder. Well, as I told you when we met, Captain, our last ship got taken out pretty hard by the Dragoons. I know you're wanting to steer clear of them, and well, I can't say as I blame you, but I was wondering if we might be able to put a hurting on maybe one or two of their ships. They've been bird dogging Isley pretty hard lately, like the ones that hit our old ship. It'd be good for his cousin to get some closure, and, well, might get us some reputation and favor around Coin while we're at it. Bester took a small step back once he had finished, wiping some sweat from his upper lip with his hand, which only served to smear wet soot over his mouth. Bester brings up a good point, and this is something I do want to make clear to everyone on this boat. Ruku stepped up onto a crate on the deck as she spoke. We're all very different people. We have different backgrounds, different demons in our past, and different outlooks. But I want to make it clear here and now, we are now a family. I may be your captain, and this may be my ship, but you're all not just employees or guests. You're my crew, and that makes you family. Anybody messes with any of you, they mess with me. And not only me, but every other person on this ship right now. Any objections to any of that? Ruku asked the crew. Bester and the rest of the Flintlocks shook their heads no, and Laszlo followed suit. Jaina leapt up and down and squealed briefly before shouting, "Yay for family!" Zevi rolled her eyes and made no indication of agreement or objection until Jaina thrust her elbow into Zevi's side. She grunted and sighed, Yeah, family, whatever. I'll be your crazy sister if that's what you want. Just remember that don't mean I have to like any of you." Jaina smiled and threw her arms around Zevi's neck and put all her weight on her as she gave Zevi a big hug. "Yay, sisters!" Zevi groaned and tried to pry Jaina's arm from her. "Ugh, what did I just say, Daisy? I don't gotta like you. Ugh, get off!" she yelled. Ruku just cleared her throat and continued. "Alright, that settles it. We're now a family. Someone messed with several members of this family. I think we're honor bound to get some payback. What do you all say?" Ruku asked everyone energetically. This time, everyone raised their fist and cheered in agreement, even Zevi. With that settled, Ruku dismissed everyone, and they all went to their appropriate stations. Shortly thereafter, the Shizukesa set sail on her first mission, search and destroy. 2 weeks after the Shizukesa left Isley, the captain of the Gilded Trader stepped off of the small sailboat he had pulled up in and set foot on the docks of Isley with a smoldering growl. A man walked up to him and asked if he could help him secure his boat. The captain responded by shoving the man into the water and continuing his angry march towards the Spion bar. Everyone gave the man a wide berth after that, clearing his path to the bar for him. Once there, he kicked the door open and growled loudly to get everyone's attention. "Listen up. I'm looking for a little whelp of a girl. Red hair, short, arrogant. She came in one of the fastest ships this side of the Royals. Now someone here has surely seen her, and you're going to tell me exactly where she is." And that is the end of this book. The crew of the Shizukesa will return in Search and Destroy. So I hope you guys enjoyed the book, this novella. Like I said, this particular story was written by me, so I doubly hope you enjoyed it. I am still working on the second book, Search and Destroy, about halfway through it. So hopefully we'll be able to read that soon. But yeah, every Thursday we're going to do this audiobook cafe where I'll read a book or a story. And we're also going to talk about various types of coffee. And of course, I'm going to drink some. So tonight, again, was Shizukesa, a Ruku Kurasu story by Raven Lee. I'll put those links into the into the chat here if you want to check those out. So here is the link for the book. And here's the link for the coffee. There we go. So I haven't picked out another story for next week. If you have any suggestions on a book to read, definitely feel free to DM me in Twitch. You can also message me on Discord. Let me move my coffee cup over here so I can type. At cadecavediscord.com. You can join us there on our Discord. We've got a great group over there, a pretty good community, super supportive and accepting. So feel free to join us there. You can DM me on Discord. You can DM me on Twitch. Let me know if there's a story that you'd like me to read next Thursday. We're also going to be doing a different coffee every week. So this week's was Equal Exchange Coffee, the organic mind, body, and soul. It is a blend. I was saying at the beginning of the stream, it's not the most amazing coffee I've ever had, but for its budget, which is about $8 a bag, it's very, very good. It's perfect for a morning breakfast blend, but it also works pretty well as a dessert coffee because it's got a blend of medium and Vienna roasts in there. So yeah, we talked a little bit about that it's whole bean, and I showed the roast, or not the roast, the grind that I did for it. We also talked a little bit about my coffee cup, which is what inspired Ruku's coffee cup in the next book. Hers is, in the story, is a bit bigger than this one, but this one was what inspired her coffee cup in the story. So yeah, if you have a particular coffee you'd like me to try as well, a particular brand or roast or blend or anything like that, definitely feel free to let me know as well. You can DM me in Twitch or Discord. I can't make any promises on if I'll be able to get it, though if you do want to basically buy the coffee for the show, if you want to buy a bag for us to use on the stream, you can donate via raven.rocks. And when you donate there, just leave me a message and let me know, hey, I'd really like for you to try out this coffee and talk about it on your next show. And just leave me a note there or in a DM letting me know, the brand name, the particular blend or variety that you'd like me to try, or even better, a link to buy the coffee if you have the link handy. But I'd be very happy to try it and discuss it on the show. So that'll be every Thursday. I think that's going to just about wrap it up for tonight. Let's see, today's Thursday, so tomorrow is Friday. And on Fridays, we'll be doing first-person shooters. So tomorrow night, starting at about 10 p.m. Mountain Time, I'll be playing probably some Apex Legends as well as some Fistful of Frags. But if you have another FPS game that you'd like me to play or that you'd like to watch, again, feel free to DM me on Twitch or in Discord and let me know what you'd like to see. And if it's a game I have or I can get, then I will be happy to play that on the stream. So that'll be tomorrow from around 10 p.m. to 1 or 2 a.m. And that'll be Fridays. And then Saturday, we'll be doing a tabletop RPG set in a post-apocalyptic sort of dystopian world, but magic exists in it as well. It's a pretty interesting story, and that is done on Fundamental RPG, which is a system I've developed. So that'll be, I believe, episode 4 on that one. But that is a game that is really easy to pick up and really easy to jump into. So we're always looking for other players if you'd be interested in playing the game and being featured on the stream. Just let me know. Again, DM in Twitch or Discord. And I can send you the book for the rules and kind of get you up to speed on the story. Again, the system is super simple. I should be able to get you a character created with you and kind of get you oriented to it within 30 minutes to an hour. So it's real quick to build a character and jump in. But yeah, thank you guys so much for joining us. I greatly appreciate it. And let's see who we can raid here. Because I am a firm believer in sharing the love for other streamers and supporting them. And the best way I can do that is with a raid. So looks like Georgie May is streaming, and she was super awesome and came by and supported the stream, hung out for a while. So let's go raid her. So we're going to raid Georgie May 7775. Spelled that. There we go. Yeah, so be sure to go say hi. You know, feel free to mention what stream you came from, and if there was a particular line of the book that you liked, feel free to use that as a raid cry. Yeah, we'll go say hi. And then I'll see you guys again tomorrow night at 10 p.m. So, thanks. So, thanks again. Good night, guys. Good night, everybody.
A TV writer's room is not very PC. It can be a pretty masculine environment.
Oh. I saw most of the writers. I'm not overly worried about masculinity.
What is wrong with my bits?
You're a little old and a little white.
I need you.
You love me.
No, I didn't say that.
Gee, sorry. Hi, Raven! How you doing? How was your stream? How was the rest of your... how do I pick things up? Oh my god. What?